Sometimes the hardest thing about ending a life is figuring out what to do with the rest of it. Thomas Garrett stood in front of his wife's grave on a Tuesday morning in March, 8 months after the cancer had finally taken her, and tried to remember what hope felt like. The headstone was simple granite with her name and dates carved clean. Helen Marie Garrett, 1963 to 2025. Beloved wife and mother. The words meant nothing and everything. 33 years of marriage reduced to 2 lines, and a dash between numbers. The cemetery was empty except for Tom and the groundskeeper trimming hedges 3 rows over. Spring had not quite arrived in Detroit. The grass was still brown in patches, and the maple trees overhead were bare except for the smallest buds just beginning to show. Tom had brought flowers, yellow roses that Helen had loved, but now that he was here he did not know what to do with them. He set them against the base of the stone and stepped back. He was 62 years old. He had worked 33 years on the assembly line at the Ford plant in Dearborn, bolting together the same pieces in the same order until his hands could do it in his sleep. The plant had closed 2 years ago, moved production to Mexico, and Tom had taken early retirement with a pension that would keep him fed but not comfortable. Helen had been sick by then. The cancer was already spreading. The retirement party had been held in a conference room at the Union Hall, and Tom had shaken hands with men he had worked beside for 3 decades and would probably never see again. Helen died in August. The funeral was well attended. Their daughter Rebecca flew in from Boston, where she worked as a surgeon at Massachusetts General. Their son Daniel came from Seattle, where he did something with corporate law that Tom had never quite understood. Both of them had been polite and efficient, organizing the service, sorting through their mother's things, asking their father if he needed anything. They had stayed 4 days. Then they went home to their own lives, and Tom was alone in a house that suddenly felt too big and too quiet. He had sold the house 3 weeks ago. A young couple with a baby bought it, paid cash, planned to renovate. Tom watched them walk through the rooms where he had raised his children, where Helen had cooked dinner every night for 30 years, where they had fought and loved and built a life together. The couple talked about knocking down walls and updating the kitchen. Tom signed the papers and took a check and moved his belongings into a storage unit off Telegraph Road. Now he lived in a 1-bedroom apartment near the storage facility. He had a bed, a television, a coffee maker. Most days he woke up and did not know what to do with himself. He would drive to the storage unit and sit in his truck looking at the orange door that held everything he owned. Sometimes he would open it and stand among the boxes, running his hands over furniture that had no place to go. Then he would close it and drive back to the apartment and watch television until he fell asleep. The groundskeeper's trimmer buzzed in the distance. Tom looked down at his wife's grave and felt the weight of all the empty days ahead of him pressing down like a physical thing. Rebecca had called last week and suggested he look into assisted living facilities. She had sent him brochures. Lovely communities with activities and meal plans and medical staff on call 24 hours. Daniel had been more direct. He sent an email with the subject line, "We need to talk about your future." The email contained links to retirement communities near Seattle. Close to family, Daniel had written, support systems in place. Tom had not responded to either of them. He knew they meant well. They saw their father as a 62-year-old man living alone with nothing to do and nowhere to go. They saw someone who needed to be managed, taken care of, kept safe. They did not see that he was already gone in all the ways that mattered. The man who had worked the line and raised a family and built a life had disappeared with Helen. What was left was just motion without purpose. He reached down and touched the top of the headstone. The granite was cold under his fingers. He wanted to say something, some final words that would make sense of the grief, but nothing came. He had never been good with words. Helen had been the one who could talk about feelings, who could name the things that moved in the space between them. Tom just worked and provided and showed up. That had been enough when she was alive. Now it felt like nothing at all. He turned and walked back to his truck, a 10-year-old F-150 with rust along the wheel wells and a crack in the windshield he kept meaning to fix. He sat behind the wheel for a long time before starting the engine. The radio came on automatically, some talk show host arguing about politics. Tom turned it off. The silence was better. He drove back to the apartment and parked in his assigned spot. It was 10:30 in the morning. The whole day stretched ahead of him with nothing to fill it. He climbed the stairs to the second floor and unlocked his door and stood in the doorway looking at the space that was supposed to be his home. The bed was made. The dishes were washed. Everything was in its place. Everything was empty. His phone rang. Tom pulled it from his pocket and looked at the screen. Unknown number with a 307 area code. Wyoming. He almost let it go to voicemail. Then, because he had nothing else to do, he answered. The voice on the other end was formal and precise. "This is Harold Perkins calling from Sheridan, Wyoming. I'm an attorney handling the estate of Nathaniel Garrett. Am I speaking with Thomas Garrett?" Tom sat down on the edge of his bed. "Yes," he said. "Mr. Garrett, I'm calling to inform you that your grandfather passed away 6 weeks ago. I'm very sorry for your loss." Tom tried to remember the last time he had thought about his grandfather. Nathaniel Garrett, a name from childhood, barely a memory. "I didn't know him," Tom said. "I understand," Mr. Perkins said. "Your grandfather lived a rather solitary life. However, he named you as his sole heir. He's left you his property. 520 acres in Montana, about 40 miles outside of Sheridan. The estate includes a ranch house, outbuildings, and all contents therein." Tom stared at the blank wall across from his bed. "Why me?" "You're his only living relative," Mr. Perkins said. "Your mother was his only child, and she passed in 2019, correct?" "Yes." "Then it falls to you. There are papers to sign, of course. I can mail them if you prefer, or if you'd like to see the property before making any decisions, I'm available to meet in person." Tom thought about his mother. She had died of a stroke 5 years ago, quick and clean. At the funeral, Tom had asked about his grandfather, some vague memory stirring of visits when he was very young. His mother's face had gone hard. "That man threw his life away on worthless land and crazy ideas," she had said. "He chose that mountain over his own family. I don't want to hear his name." Tom had not asked again. "What kind of property?" Tom asked now. "Cattle ranch," Mr. Perkins said. "Has not been operational for some years. Your grandfather lived alone, maintained a small garden kept to himself. The land is quite remote. Beautiful country, but challenging. Most of the neighboring ranchers have told me it's difficult land to work. Rocky soil, short growing season. Your grandfather refused multiple offers to sell over the years. Why would anyone want to buy it if it's so difficult?" Mr. Perkins paused. "That's a question I've wondered myself. But the offers were substantial. Your grandfather turned them all down." Tom stood and walked to the window. Outside, the parking lot stretched away toward Telegraph Road. Cars moved past in steady streams. Everyone going somewhere. Everyone with somewhere to go. "I'd like to see it," Tom said. "Of course, when would be convenient?" Tom looked around his apartment. At the bed and the television and the life he did not want. "Tomorrow," he said. He hung up and sat back down on the bed. His grandfather, Nathaniel Garrett. Tom had met him exactly twice. Once when he was 8 years old, his mother driving them out to some place in the mountains, a long trip that ended at a cabin that smelled like wood smoke and coffee. Tom remembered a man with weathered hands and eyes that seemed to see through things. The visit had lasted one afternoon. His mother had been tense the entire time, barely speaking. They left before dinner. The second visit was when Tom was 12. His mother had received a letter. She read it at the kitchen table while Tom ate cereal before school. Then she folded it and put it away and said nothing. But 2 weeks later they drove out again, another long trip, another tense silence. This time Nathaniel had shown Tom around the property, taught him to recognize deer tracks in the mud, pointed out a golden eagle circling overhead. Tom remembered standing on a ridge looking out over miles of empty land and feeling something he could not name. Freedom maybe, or possibility. They left before sunset. In the car, Tom's mother had said he's sick, not in his body, in his head. He thinks that land is worth something, but it's just rocks and weeds. He could have had a real life, but he gave it all up for nothing. Tom had asked what she meant. His mother had not answered. Now, 30 years later, Tom packed a bag. He did not have much to bring. Clothes, toiletries, his phone charger. He threw the bag in the back of his truck and locked the apartment behind him. He stopped at a gas station and filled the tank and bought a large coffee and a map because he did not trust his phone's GPS for where he was going. The drive took 18 hours. Tom left Detroit at 2 in the afternoon and drove through Michigan into Wisconsin, through the darkness across Minnesota and South Dakota, watching the landscape flatten and then begin to rise again as he pushed west into Wyoming. He stopped twice for gas and once at a rest area to sleep for 3 hours in the truck cab, his jacket balled up against the window. He woke stiff and cold and kept driving. Michigan gave way to Wisconsin, the forests thick along the highway, small towns appearing and disappearing in the headlights. Tom drove through the night, watching the dashboard clock tick forward, counting the miles. The truck's heater worked intermittently. When it cut out, the cold seeped in through the cracked windshield. Tom turned up the collar of his jacket and kept his hands tight on the wheel. Somewhere past Madison, he stopped at a truck stop for coffee. The fluorescent lights inside were harsh after hours of darkness. A waitress with tired eyes poured him coffee without asking. Tom sat at the counter and watched truckers come and go, men who lived on the road, who measured their lives in hauls and deliveries. He wondered if that was what he was now, a man between places, belonging nowhere. The sun rose somewhere over the Dakota plains. Tom watched it climb through his rearview mirror, the sky turning from black to gray to pale orange. The land had changed overnight. The trees were gone, replaced by endless grass and rolling hills. The horizon stretched impossibly far in every direction. Tom had never seen so much open space. It made the truck feel small, made him feel smaller. He drank cold coffee from a thermos and listened to the rhythm of the tires on asphalt. The radio picked up country stations, ranchers talking about cattle prices and weather, a preacher somewhere delivering a sermon about faith in difficult times. Tom listened without really hearing, his mind elsewhere. He thought about Helen, about the way she used to wait up for him when he worked late shifts, sitting in the living room with a book she was not really reading, pretending she was not worried about him driving home exhausted. About the first time he kissed her behind the bleachers after a high school football game, her lips cold from the October air, her hands warm when she reached for his face. About the way she laughed, head thrown back, completely unself-conscious. About Sunday mornings when the kids were young, the four of them reading the newspaper in bed, Helen doing the crossword while Rebecca and Daniel fought over the comics. He thought about the last time he saw her conscious in the hospital. The cancer had taken everything by then. She was barely 90 pounds, her skin paper thin, her eyes huge in her wasted face. But her mind was clear. She had looked at him and said, "You're going to be okay. Find something, Tom. Don't just stop." He had promised her he would. He had lied. The memories came in waves as the miles rolled past. Vietnam. He had been 19 when he shipped out, a combat engineer building bridges and clearing roads. He had seen things he never talked about, done things he tried to forget. When he came home, he had been different, quieter. Helen had understood without him having to explain. She had given him space to be silent, to work through it in his own way. The factory had saved him in some ways. The routine, the physical work, the simple act of showing up every day and doing something productive. He had been good at it. His hands learned the motions, and his mind could go somewhere else while his body worked. 33 years of bolting the same pieces together. Some people thought it sounded like prison. To Tom, it had been peace. The roads grew narrower as he climbed into Wyoming. The interstate gave way to state highways, then county roads, then gravel tracks that wound between hills covered in sage and grass. He passed through small towns that were barely more than a gas station and a post office. Hand-painted signs advertised hay for sale, tack repair, Bible study on Sundays. The few people he saw moved with the unhurried pace of those who measured time in seasons rather than hours. Harold Perkins had given him directions to the ranch. Turn off Highway 14 at mile marker 87. Follow the unnamed road north for 12 miles. The property will be on your right, marked by a wooden gate. Tom found the turn just as the sun was setting. The unnamed road was 2 dirt tracks with grass growing between them. His truck bounced over ruts and rocks. The land on either side was empty except for the occasional cluster of cattle in the distance. He saw the gate in his headlights, weathered wood leaning slightly with a sign so faded he could barely read it. Garrett Ranch. Tom got out and opened the gate and drove through and closed it behind him. The road climbed for another mile, winding up a ridge. Then the house appeared. It was smaller than he expected. A log structure, maybe 900 square feet, with a sagging porch and windows that reflected nothing but darkness. The roof was patched in places with newer shingles that did not match. A stone chimney rose from one end. Behind the house, he could make out the shapes of outbuildings, a barn and what looked like cattle pens, all in various states of collapse. The land beyond disappeared into shadow. Tom sat in his truck with the engine running, looking at the house that was now his. The headlights cut through the gathering dark, illuminating the porch where his grandfather must have sat on summer evenings, looking out at the same mountains Tom could barely see now. He tried to imagine the old man's life here, alone for how many years? 30, 40, working this land that no one else wanted, refusing to leave, refusing to sell. Why? The question hung in the air with the settling dust. Tom turned off the engine. The silence that followed was absolute. No traffic, no neighbors, no sound at all except the wind moving through grass and the tick of the cooling engine. Tom had lived his entire life in cities, surrounded by the constant noise of human activity. This silence was something different. It was not peaceful. It was vast and indifferent and slightly terrifying. He got out of the truck and stood in the dark. The air was cold and thin. He was at altitude here, 7,000 feet maybe, and his lungs worked harder to pull in oxygen. The sky overhead was black and filled with more stars than he had ever seen. The Milky Way stretched horizon to horizon, a river of light that made him feel impossibly small. He walked to the porch. The boards creaked under his weight. The front door was unlocked. Tom pushed it open and felt along the wall for a light switch. When he found it and flipped it up, nothing happened. He tried again. Still nothing. Either the power was out or it had been shut off. Tom went back to his truck and found the flashlight in his glove box. The beam cut through the darkness of the house, revealing a single large room with a kitchen area at one end and a wood stove at the other. A table and 2 chairs. A narrow bed against the wall. Shelves lined with books and canned goods. Everything covered in a fine layer of dust. He swept the light around slowly, taking it in. This was where his grandfather had lived. This small space carved out of the wilderness. Tom tried to feel some connection, some sense of family or history, but there was nothing. Just an old man's abandoned things in an empty house. He went back outside and got his bag from the truck. There was a hand pump by the porch. He tried it, and after several attempts, water came out in rusty spurts, then clear. He drank from his cupped hands. The water was cold and tasted of minerals. He found a camping lantern in the back of the truck and brought it inside. By its light, he could see more details, photographs on the walls, a young woman in a faded dress standing in front of this same house, a group of men in military uniforms, an old couple on their wedding day. Tom did not recognize any of them. He lay down on the bed without undressing. The mattress was thin and smelled of age. The springs creaked. Through the window above the bed, he could see stars. He closed his eyes and listened to the wind and felt more alone than he had ever felt in his life. Sleep did not come easy. He drifted in and out, aware of every sound. Something scurrying in the walls, the groan of old wood settling, an owl calling from somewhere close. At some point before dawn, he fell into a deeper sleep and dreamed of Helen standing in a field of grass, calling his name. He tried to reach her, but the distance between them grew with every step. He woke to sunlight streaming through the window. His back ached. His neck was stiff. He sat up and looked around the room that was somehow both familiar and utterly strange. This was his now. This house, this land, this emptiness. He did not know what to do with any of it. He got up and went outside. The morning was clear and cold. From the porch he could see for miles. Mountains rose to the north and west, their peaks still white with snow. The valley below was a patchwork of brown and green, cut through by a creek that glinted in the early light. The land immediately around the house was overgrown with sagebrush and wild grass. The cattle pens were collapsed, the wood gray and splintered. The barn leaned at an angle that suggested it might fall with the next strong wind. Tom walked down to the barn and pushed open the door. Inside, the smell of old hay and animal musk. Light came through gaps in the walls. There were stalls for horses, empty now. A workbench covered in tools. A rusted tractor that looked like it had not run in 20 years. Everything was coated in dust and cobwebs. He heard a vehicle approaching and walked back outside. A pickup truck was coming up the road, newer than his, dark blue with a tool box in the bed. It pulled up to the house and a man got out. He was older than Tom, maybe late 60s, with a face like worn leather and hands that had spent a lifetime working. He wore jeans and a flannel shirt and a cap that said Montana Stock Growers Association. He looked at Tom with eyes that missed nothing. "You must be Thomas," the man said. His voice was rough but not unfriendly. Tom said, "People call me Tom." The man nodded. "Vernon Pike. I own the ranch that borders yours to the east. I was the one who found your grandfather. When he did not answer his phone for 4 days, I came to check. He was in the house. Heart gave out, the doctor said. He was 91. Tom did not know what to say. "Thank you," he managed. Vernon looked past him at the house and the collapsed pens and the overgrown land. "I thought you might show up eventually. Harold said he was trying to reach you. I came as soon as he called." Vernon walked to the porch and sat down on the steps without asking. Tom joined him. They sat in silence for a moment, looking out at the mountains. "Your grandfather was a hard man to know," Vernon said finally, kept to himself mostly. "But he was good people, honest, fair. He helped me out a few times over the years when I needed it. I tried to return the favor, but he did not like accepting help." "How long did he live here?" Vernon thought about it. 45 years, give or take. Came back from the war, bought this land for next to nothing. Ran cattle for a while, never made much money at it. Soil is rocky. Growing season is short. Water rights are complicated. Most ranchers would have given up. But he did not. No, he did not. Vernon paused. There were offers, you know, people wanting to buy the land. Some of them very good offers. Your grandfather refused them all. Folks in town thought he was crazy, sitting on worthless land, turning down money he could have used. Tom looked at the collapsed pens, the leaning barn, the house held together with patched repairs. Why would anyone want to buy it? Vernon shrugged. That is what I always wondered, but the offers kept coming. Different companies, different people, but always the same question. Will Nathaniel sell? He always said no. Tom tried to process this. His mother had called his grandfather crazy, said he threw his life away on worthless land. But if people kept trying to buy it, maybe it was not worthless after all. Vernon stood up. I brought you some things, basics to get you started. He walked to his truck and came back with a cardboard box. Eggs from my chickens, bread my daughter baked, coffee, some canned goods. The power should still be on, but you will need to check the breaker. Pump outside works, but the seal is old, might need replacing. Tom took the box. I appreciate it. Vernon looked at him seriously. What are you planning to do with the place? Tom had no answer. I do not know yet. Smart thing would be to sell it. Take whatever you can get and go back to wherever you came from. This is not easy land, Tom. 3 owners tried to make it work before your grandfather bought it. All of them failed inside 2 years. And you are what, 60? 62. Vernon nodded. No offense, but ranching is not work for a man starting from zero at 62, especially alone. Tom looked out at the land stretching away toward the mountains. He thought about his apartment in Detroit, about the storage unit holding his old life in boxes, about his children suggesting assisted living. He thought about Helen telling him to find something. I might stay a while, Tom said, see what it is like. Vernon studied him for a long moment. All right then. If you are going to try, you will need help. I have got equipment I can loan you, and I have got a horse, old mare named Bess. Stubborn as they come, but she will work if you treat her right. I have never worked with horses. You will learn. Vernon walked back to his truck. I am just over the ridge to the east. You need anything, you come find me. And Tom, be careful. There are people who wanted this land when your grandfather was alive. They might come around now that he is gone. What people? Vernon climbed into his truck. Just be careful. He drove away, leaving Tom standing in the yard with a box of supplies and more questions than answers. Tom carried the box inside and set it on the table. The coffee was fresh ground, the bread still warm. He found a manual coffee grinder on a shelf and ground beans, and boiled water on a propane camp stove he found under the sink. While the coffee brewed, he looked through the rest of the house. There was not much. Nathaniel had lived simply, clothes worn soft with use, a few books mostly about ranching and local history, the photographs on the walls. Tom stopped in front of the portrait of the young woman, dark hair, serious eyes, a slight smile. On the back, written in faded ink, Elizabeth 1951, his grandmother. She had died before Tom was born. His mother had never talked about her. In a drawer beside the bed, Tom found papers, the deed to the property, insurance documents, a will, simple and clear, leaving everything to Thomas Garrett, and beneath these, a sealed envelope with his name on it. The handwriting was cramped but precise. Tom held the envelope for a long time. This was a message from a man he had never known, a grandfather who was little more than a ghost. Part of him wanted to open it immediately. Part of him was afraid of what it might say. He set it aside and kept looking. In the closet, he found a shotgun, clean and oiled, boxes of shells on the shelf above, a hunting jacket with a repair patch on the elbow, boots that might fit him if he wore thick socks. Beneath a loose floorboard in the corner, something else. Tom pried the board up and found a leather-bound journal. The cover was cracked with age. He opened it carefully. The pages were filled with the same cramped handwriting as the envelope, dates going back to 1973. Tom sat on the bed and began to read. The early entries were mundane: planting schedules, weather observations, notes about cattle and fences. His grandfather's voice came through the words, practical and direct. Turnips doing well this year. Need to replace the south fence before winter. The roan mare threw a shoe. But there were personal notes too, things that made Nathaniel real. I miss Elizabeth today. 20 years gone and it still feels like yesterday. Saw her face in the clouds over the ridge. Or my daughter called. We argued again. She wants me to sell, move to town. Cannot make her understand why I stay. Tom turned pages carefully, the paper brittle with age. An entry from 1975. Cattle prices dropped again. Might have to sell half the herd to make it through winter, but I will not sell the land. Elizabeth and I built this together. Every fence post, every wall of this house. Her hands touched this place. I will not let it go. Another from 1980. My daughter brought her boy to visit today. Thomas, 8 years old, smart kid, curious. I showed him the ridge, the creek, the places Elizabeth loved. He asked good questions. I wanted to tell him about this land, about what it means to stand for something. But his mother rushed him away. She is ashamed of me. Of this life I chose. Maybe she is right to be. Tom's throat tightened. He remembered that visit. The weathered hands pointing out animal tracks. The quiet voice explaining how to read the land. He had been too young to understand what his grandfather was trying to share. More entries. 1982, another offer today, company called Montana Resources. They said the land is worth 5 times what I paid for it. They do not say why. I told them no. The man got angry, said I was a fool. Maybe I am, but it is my land to be a fool on. 1985, winter is hard this year. Furnace died, living with just the wood stove. Hands do not work as well in the cold anymore. Getting old. Sometimes I wonder what the point is. Then I go outside and see the mountains and remember, this is home. You do not leave home just because it gets hard. An entry from 1990, saw lights on the North Ridge last night. Impossible colors, blue and green moving against the wind. I went up there this morning. Found nothing but disturbed ground. Same spot where I found the first samples years ago. The land has secrets. I knew that when I bought it. Some secrets are meant to stay buried. Tom paused. Lights, samples, what was his grandfather talking about? He kept reading, searching for more clues. An entry from 1995, a geologist from the university came by. Said he was doing research on mineral formations. Asked to take soil samples. I told him no. He was polite but persistent, offered money. I still said no. After he left, I checked the places Elizabeth and I marked. Everything still buried, everything still safe. But I worry, they know something. I can see it in the way they ask questions. 1998. Vernon's wife Millie stopped by with pie. Good woman. She asked if I ever got lonely up here by myself. I told her the truth. Loneliness is the price of protecting what matters. She did not ask what I meant. Mountain people understand there are some things you do not talk about. There was an entry from 1978 that made Tom pause and read twice. A man came by today asking about the land. Said he represented a mining company. Offered 3 times what the place is worth. I told him no. He said I was foolish. I said some things are worth more than money. He did not understand. Most people would not, but Elizabeth would have. She always knew why we stayed. Not for the land itself, for what we found here, for what we buried to keep safe from people like him. Tom closed the journal and looked around the small cabin. His grandfather had protected something for 50 years. Protected it from people who wanted to take it. But what? What had Nathaniel found that was worth a lifetime of solitude? He stood and walked to the window. Outside, the land stretched away toward the mountains, empty, rocky, beautiful in a harsh, unforgiving way. Tom tried to imagine working it, clearing the overgrown fields, repairing the pens, learning skills he had never needed in Detroit. It seemed impossible. He was 62 years old. He had worked an assembly line for 30 years. What did he know about ranching? But what was waiting for him back in Detroit? An apartment that was not home, children who called out of duty, days that bled into each other with nothing to mark them. Helen was gone. The factory was gone. The life he had built was gone. Maybe that meant he had nothing to lose. He picked up the sealed envelope with his name on it. His hands were steadier now. He slid his finger under the flap and broke the seal that his grandfather had made who knew how many years ago. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded once. Tom unfolded it and read. Thomas, the letter began. If you are reading this, you decided to stay. I hoped you would. Your mother never forgave me for choosing this land over comfort. She wanted easy life. I wanted honest one. They are not the same. I know you do not know me. That is my failure as much as hers. But I have watched from distance, heard about your service, your marriage, your work. You are stronger than you think. This land will test you. It tests everyone. But beneath the rock and struggle there is something worth protecting. I have kept it safe for 50 years. Now it is your turn. Guard what you find. Trust your instincts. And do not let them take what is not theirs to claim. I am proud you came home. Nathaniel. Tom read the letter 3 times. Guard what you find. What did that mean? What had his grandfather found on this land that needed guarding for 50 years? He folded the letter and put it back in the envelope. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows. Tom looked at the journal, the photographs, the simple room where his grandfather had lived and died. He thought about Vernon's warning. There are people who wanted this land when your grandfather was alive. They might come around now that he is gone. Tom Garrett had come to Montana expecting to sign papers and sell a property he did not want. Instead, he stood in his grandfather's house holding a letter that felt like a challenge and a warning. Guard what you find. He had not found anything yet, but something told him he was going to. He went outside and looked at the collapsed cattle pens and the overgrown fields. The work that needed doing was overwhelming, but for the first time in months he felt something other than emptiness. Not hope exactly, but purpose, direction, a reason to wake up tomorrow. He would stay, at least for now. He would try to understand what his grandfather had protected. He would learn this land that everyone said was worthless but that someone kept trying to buy. He would probably fail. Vernon had made that clear, but failing while trying was better than succeeding at nothing. Tom walked down to where the garden plot had been. The soil was rocky and hard. Weeds grew thick, but underneath he could see the outline of raised beds, carefully constructed from salvaged lumber. His grandfather had worked this plot for decades, coaxing food from difficult ground. There was a lesson in that, something about persistence, about doing the work even when it made no sense to anyone else. Tom knelt and pressed his hand into the soil. It was cold and rough, but it was real. It was something he could work with his hands, something he could tend and see grow, something that would demand everything he had and give back only what he earned. He stood and looked out at Thunder Ridge rising against the sky. The mountains were indifferent to his presence. The land did not care if he stayed or left, but Tom was here now. And for the first time since Helen died, he had a reason to be somewhere. He walked back to the house and found the journal and the letter. He would read them both again tonight by lamplight. He would learn what his grandfather had to teach. And tomorrow, he would start the work of making this place his own. The sun was setting behind the ridge. The sky turned orange and purple and deep blue. Tom sat on the porch and watched the light fade from the land. He thought about calling Rebecca or Daniel, telling them where he was, what he was doing. But he did not reach for his phone. They would not understand. They would think grief had driven him to make a foolish choice. Maybe they were right, but it was his choice to make. The first star appeared overhead, then another, then thousands. Tom sat in the growing dark and listened to the silence and felt the weight of the empty days lift just slightly. Not gone, but lighter, manageable. He had work to do, land to learn, a mystery to unravel. It was enough. He went inside and lit the lantern and opened the journal again. He would read until he could not keep his eyes open, and tomorrow he would begin. 3 weeks passed on Thunder Ridge, and Tom Garrett began to understand what work meant. Real work, the kind that left your hands raw and your back aching and your mind too tired for the grief that had been eating you alive. He woke before dawn every morning to the sound of absolute silence, dressed in his grandfather's work clothes that fit well enough, and walked out into air so cold it hurt to breathe. Vernon had brought over 6 head of cattle on the second week, young steers that needed pasture and attention. You cannot learn ranching without cattle, Vernon had said, unloading them from his trailer. These are yours to work with. Feed them, water them, keep them healthy. Learn their ways. Tom had nodded, having no idea what he was agreeing to, but Vernon's expression said this was not negotiable. The cattle were stubborn and unpredictable. They broke through fences Tom had just repaired. They refused to move when he needed them to move and wandered off when he needed them to stay put. But slowly, watching them, working with them, Tom began to understand their logic. They were creatures of routine and comfort. They wanted good grass and clean water and to be left alone to their grazing. Once he understood that, everything got easier. Vernon had also delivered Bess, the mare he had promised. She was 20 years old, gray around the muzzle, with eyes that suggested she had seen everything and was not impressed by any of it. Tom had never worked with horses. In Detroit, horses were things you saw at parades or in movies. Here, Bess was transportation and equipment and company all in one. She taught him patience. When Tom tried to rush, she simply stopped moving. When he got frustrated, she turned her head and looked at him with an expression that clearly said, "You are the problem here, not me." So Tom learned to slow down. He learned to read her body language, to understand when she was willing to work and when she needed rest. He learned to brush her coat and clean her hooves and check her shoes. His hands, which had spent 30 years assembling car parts, learned the different skill of caring for a living thing. The work was endless. Fences needed constant repair. The barn roof leaked in 3 places. The pump seal Vernon had mentioned finally gave out, and Tom spent a frustrating afternoon replacing it with parts from the hardware store in Elkhorn. Working from instructions on a YouTube video he watched on his phone while sitting in the truck where he could get a signal. When the pump finally worked again, water flowing clear and cold, Tom felt a satisfaction deeper than anything he had known at the factory. He cleared the garden plot his grandfather had worked, pulling weeds that had taken over in the months since Nathaniel's death. The soil underneath was dark and rich, carefully amended over decades. Tom found the old garden journal and studied the planting schedules, the notes about what worked and what did not. It was late in the season, almost November, but there were still crops that could go in. Winter wheat, turnips, hardy greens that could handle frost. He planted in neat rows, following his grandfather's diagrams, pressing seeds into cold earth and covering them gently. He did not know if anything would grow. The growing season was short here and winter was coming, but the act of planting felt important. It was faith made physical, a bet on the future, a belief that spring would come and with it life. Vernon stopped by every few days, usually in the early morning, arriving in his blue truck with some excuse about checking on Bess or bringing supplies Tom might need. But really, Tom understood, Vernon was checking on him, making sure the old factory worker from Detroit had not given up yet, had not packed his things and driven back to whatever passed for civilization in his former life. They did not talk much. Vernon was a man of few words and Tom appreciated that. They would walk the property together, Vernon pointing out things that needed attention. That fence line is weak. Those cattle are favoring their left side, might be a stone in the hoof. The roof on the equipment shed will not make it through another winter. Tom absorbed it all, learning the language of the land from someone who had spoken it his entire life. Sometimes Vernon offered help directly. Once, when Tom was struggling to replace a rotted fence post, Vernon simply picked up a post hole digger and started working alongside him. They dug 6 holes that afternoon, set 6 new posts, strung new wire. When they finished, Vernon wiped his forehead and said, "Good work." Then he climbed in his truck and left. Tom stood looking at the fence they had built and felt something unfamiliar. Pride, maybe, or belonging. The town of Elkhorn was 40 minutes down the mountain, a collection of buildings clustered around a single main street. There was a general store, a post office, a diner, a feed supply, and a gas station. The general store was run by Wayne Hutchins, a man in his mid-60s with silver hair and sharp eyes that seemed to calculate the worth of everything they landed on. Tom drove down once a week for supplies. At first, Wayne was distant, processing Tom's purchases with minimal conversation. The usual new person treatment, Tom figured. Someone who would probably not last the winter, not worth getting to know. But Wayne's daughter Bate was different. She worked the store with her father, and she had a warmth that cut through the mountain reserve. She poured Tom coffee from the pot they kept by the register and asked how he was settling in. She shared gossip about the town, who was having trouble with their well, whose daughter was getting married, whose cattle had gotten loose again. She never asked directly about Nathaniel, but Tom sensed she had known his grandfather, had maybe even liked him when others in town thought he was crazy. It was Bate who warned Tom about winter. "You have firewood?" she asked one afternoon in late October. Tom admitted he did not have nearly enough. She directed him to a man who sold cords of seasoned pine and fir, gave Tom her own truck to borrow when his could not handle the load. When he tried to pay her for the favor, she waved him off. "Your grandfather helped my mother when she was sick," she said. "Did not charge us for supplies when we could not pay. Consider it evening the account." Tom stacked the firewood against the north wall of the house, learning the rhythm of the work. Bend, lift, stack. Bend, lift, stack. His back protested at first, muscles that had not been used this way in years waking up and complaining. But after a few days, the pain became familiar, almost welcome. It was honest pain, the kind that came from useful work. November arrived with the first real snow. Tom woke one morning to find the world transformed, everything covered in white that caught the early light and threw it back in shades of pink and gold. The cattle stood in the pasture, their breath making clouds in the cold air. Bess was in the small corral Tom had repaired, unfazed by the weather, her thick winter coat already grown in. Tom checked the garden plot and found his turnips thriving. The greens had pushed through the soil and were growing faster than the book said they should. The winter wheat was established, green shoots visible through the thin snow. Something about following his grandfather's methods, using the same soil amendments and planting schedules, was working. Tom knelt beside the turnip row and felt something close to wonder. He had made these grow. With his own hands and his own effort, he had coaxed life from difficult ground. His hands had changed. The soft skin of a factory worker was gone, replaced by calluses and small scars. There was a cut on his left thumb from a barbed wire fence, a blister on his right palm from the shovel handle. His fingernails were permanently rimmed with dirt no amount of scrubbing could completely remove. But they were capable hands now. Hands that could splice a broken fence wire, handle a nervous steer, adjust a saddle cinch in the dark. His shoulders had broadened from the constant lifting. Hay bales, feed bags, fence posts, tools. The work used muscles he had forgotten he had. Every morning he woke sore in new places. Every night he fell asleep before his head fully settled on the pillow. His face had weathered, new lines forming around his eyes from squinting in the mountain sun. His skin had darkened from hours outside. Even his voice had changed, dropped lower, grown quieter. He spoke less now, learned to communicate with gestures and looks the way Vernon did. When he looked in the mirror, he barely recognized himself. The broken man who had stood at Helen's grave seemed like someone from another life. That man had been empty. This man, the one looking back from the glass, had dirt under his nails and work ahead of him and reasons to wake up in the morning. Not happiness exactly, but something better, purpose. The cattle taught him about responsibility. They needed him every day, regardless of whether or how he felt. On mornings when the temperature dropped below zero, when ice formed thick on the water trough, and his fingers went numb in his gloves, the cattle still needed water. He learned to break ice with an axe, to carry buckets from the pump when the trough froze solid. The steers watched him work with their dark, placid eyes, steam rising from their nostrils, waiting patiently for him to finish. He learned to read their health in small signs, how they stood, how they moved, whether they were eating well or holding back. Once he noticed one of the younger steers favoring its left front leg. Vernon showed him how to examine the hoof, how to remove the stone that had lodged there, how to clean and treat the bruise. The steer bellowed and tried to pull away, but Tom held firm and Vernon nodded approval. "You are learning," Vernon said. "Cattle can tell when you know what you are doing. They trust confidence." Bess was a different kind of teacher. She had moods. Some days she was willing to work, responding to the slightest pressure from Tom's legs, turning and stopping as if reading his mind. Other days she was stubborn, refusing to move from the corral, looking at Tom with an expression that clearly said not today. Tom learned not to force it. On those days he worked on foot and let Bess rest. But on good days, riding across the property with the mountains rising around him and the cold wind in his face, Tom felt something he had not felt since before Helen got sick. Freedom. Not the empty freedom of having nothing, the fuller freedom of having chosen something and following through. He had chosen this place. This hard, beautiful, demanding place. And it was choosing him back slowly, teaching him its language. In the evenings, after the work was done and he had eaten whatever simple meal he could manage, Tom read his grandfather's journal by the light of the kerosene lamp. The propane lamp hissed softly. Outside, the wind moved through the pines. Inside, Tom traveled through Nathaniel's life one page at a time, learning the man he had never known. The journal started in 1952, the year Nathaniel and Elizabeth had bought the land. The early entries were full of hope and struggle in equal measure. Bought 520 acres today. Elizabeth stood on the ridge and cried. "Happy tears," she said. "Our land, our home. Nobody can take this from us. The house needs a new roof before winter. We have 20 head of cattle and enough hay to see them through if we are careful and lucky." 1953, Elizabeth planted beans today. Said she could feel this place wanted to grow things. I told her she was being romantic. She told me I was being blind. The beans came up strong. She was right. She usually is. 1954, hard winter. Lost 3 head to cold. Elizabeth sick with pneumonia for 2 weeks. I thought I might lose her, but she is stronger than she looks. We made it through. Then the tone shifted. An entry from April 1954, found something in the north pasture today. Rock that does not belong, too dense, wrong color when wet. Showed Elizabeth. She held it up to the light and said it was beautiful, like it was full of rainbows. I do not know what it is, but it does not feel like an ordinary stone. Tom turned pages, watching the mystery unfold. May 1954, Jim Foster came by, old army buddy from the war. We served together in the engineers building bridges in France. He is a geologist now at the university in Bozeman. I showed him the rock. He went quiet, really quiet, asked where I found it. I took him to the spot. He spent 3 hours taking samples, making notes. When he left, he said not to mention this to anyone. The way he said it made my stomach turn. June 1954, Jim called, said he ran the tests. The rock is something called neodymium, rare earth element. He used words I did not understand, strategic materials, military applications. Said if there is a deposit here, it could be significant, very significant. Asked if I had told anyone. I said no. He said, good, keep it that way. We need to think about this carefully. July 1954. Jim came back with more equipment. We spent a week mapping the area. He thinks the deposit extends across most of my northern section, maybe 200 acres or more. He got very serious, told me this could be worth millions. But he also said if the government finds out, they will invoke eminent domain, national security, strategic materials. They will take my land, pay me what they decide it is worth, and I will have no say. Elizabeth and I talked about it all night. She said this land is ours. We bought it. We worked it. If there is something valuable here, it is ours to decide what to do with it. August 1954, Jim and I made our decision. We bury the evidence, all of it. His analysis, the samples, the maps. We hide it where nobody will find it unless we want them to. The government does not get to take what is ours just because they decide they need it. This is America. A man has a right to his property. We are betting that someday things will change. That private rights will matter more than government needs. Until then, we keep the secret. Tom read on, absorbed. The entries from the next few years documented the careful concealment of the discovery. Jim and I buried another cache today. We are documenting everything. If something happens to us, whoever comes after needs to be able to prove what is here. But not yet. Not while the government is in a mood to take whatever it wants in the name of security. Then Elizabeth got sick. The journal entries from 1957 and 1958 were painful to read. Her cough is worse. The doctor in Sheridan says there is nothing to be done. Some kind of consumption of the lungs. She is getting weaker. I cannot lose her. This land means nothing without her. January 1959, Elizabeth is bedridden now. She weighs less than 90 pounds, but her mind is sharp. She made me promise something today. Promise you will stay, she said. Promise you will protect what we found, not for the money, for the principle. They cannot just take what is ours because it is convenient for them. I promised her. I would promise her anything. March 1959. Elizabeth died this morning just after sunrise. I was holding her hand. She looked at me and smiled and said she could see the mountains through the window. Then she closed her eyes. I buried her on the ridge where she loved to watch the sunset. I will not leave this place now. It holds her. As long as I am here, she is not really gone. Tom had to stop reading. He stood and walked to the window, looked out at the dark mountains. His grandfather had lost the woman he loved and had stayed anyway, alone with his grief and his secret. Tom understood that kind of loss now, the way it hollowed you out, the way everything else seemed trivial next to the hole where the person used to be. He went back to the journal. The years after Elizabeth's death were sparse. Fewer entries, shorter notes, fixed the fence, sold 6 head. Winter came early, but occasionally there were references to the buried treasure and to increasing outside interest. 1962, my daughter came to visit, brought her boy Thomas, who is turning 12, a quiet kid, good kid. I wanted to tell him about this place, about what it means, but his mother would not let us be alone together. She thinks I am wasting my life here. She wants me to sell, move to the city, be normal. I tried to explain. This land is not about money or comfort. It is about standing for something. She did not understand. She left angry. I do not think she will come back. The prediction proved correct. The next mention of his mother was not until 1975. My daughter called, first time in 8 years. She wanted to know if I was still refusing to sell. I said yes. She said I was throwing my life away. I said it was my life to throw. We have not spoken since. More entries about offers to buy the land. 1970, Montana Mining Corporation made an offer, said they wanted to develop the property. I asked for what? They said general mineral exploration. I said no. The man seemed surprised, asked what it would take. I said there is no price. He left confused. 1976, same company back again with a higher offer. This time they brought lawyers. Started talking about surveys they had done, anomalies they had detected. I realized they know something. Not the full picture, but enough to be interested. I told them to leave my property. They did, but they will be back. But there were other entries too, ones that hinted at something beyond the daily struggle of ranch life. An entry from 1954 made Tom pause. Found something in the north pasture today. Rock that does not belong. Too dense, wrong color. Brought it home, showed Elizabeth. She said it was beautiful. I do not know what it is. Tom turned pages looking for more. A week later, Jim Foster came by. Old Army buddy, geologist now at the university. I showed him the rock. He went quiet, asked where I found it. I took him to the spot. He took samples, said he needed to run tests. Told me not to mention this to anyone. The way he said it made me nervous. More weeks passed in the journal. Then Jim called. The rock is rare earth element. Neodymium, he said. Maybe lanthanum too. Valuable for military applications, electronics, magnets. Said if there is a deposit here it could be significant. Asked if I had told anyone. I said no. He said good, keep it that way. Tom set the journal down and looked around the small cabin. His grandfather had found something valuable on this land 70 years ago and had never told anyone. Why? He kept reading, hunting for answers. The entries became more cryptic. Jim and I mapped the likely deposit area. It extends across most of my northern property, maybe into Vernon's land too. Jim says it could be worth millions, maybe tens of millions. But he also says if the government finds out, they will claim eminent domain for national security. They will take the land, pay me some fraction of its value, and turn this place into a mine. Elizabeth and I talked about it tonight. We agreed. Some things are worth more than money. This is our home. We will keep the secret. Tom read through 1955, 1956, 1957. The journal entries mixed mundane ranch work with coded references to the secret. Jim came by with new test results. The deposit is larger than we thought. We buried the evidence in 5 locations across the property. Only he and I know where. Elizabeth knows too, but she will never tell. She understands what is at stake. Then Elizabeth died and the tone of the journal changed. Grief overwhelmed everything for months. But eventually Nathaniel started writing about the land again, and the references to people wanting to buy the property increased. A man from Montana Mining Corporation offered me double what I paid. I said no. He seemed surprised, said the land was not worth anything for ranching. I agreed. He left confused. More offers came over the years, each one larger than the last. The journal documented them all. Nathaniel always refused, never explained why. And through it all, Jim Foster appeared periodically, checking on the secret, making sure it stayed buried. Until 1978, Tom found the entry that changed everything. Jim came tonight. He is scared. A company called Apex Resource Group has been asking questions at the university. They have new survey technology, satellite imaging that can detect mineral anomalies. Jim thinks they know something is here. He wants to go public, do things properly, get environmental protections in place before they move in. I told him that going public means losing everything. The government will take the land no matter what protections are promised. We argued. He left angry. 3 weeks later, another entry. Jim is dead. Car accident, the sheriff said. Went off Highway 212 in the dark. But Jim drove these roads for 30 years. He did not have accidents. The sheriff is not investigating. Nobody is asking questions. I know what happened. They killed him because he knew too much and was going to talk. I am burying everything deeper. The maps, the samples, Jim's analysis. I will guard this secret until I die. It is the only way to protect the land. Tom closed the journal and sat in the darkness. His grandfather had lived with this for 40 years after Jim Foster died. alone with the knowledge that his friend had been murdered, alone with the weight of the secret. No wonder his mother thought he was crazy. No wonder the town whispered about old Nathaniel up on his ridge, refusing all reason. But he had not been crazy. He had been protecting something, not just the land, the principle, the right to keep what was his, the right to say no to power and money and pressure. Tom looked around the small cabin and felt the weight of inheritance settle on his shoulders. Guard what you find, his grandfather's letter had said. Now Tom understood what he was supposed to guard. The next morning, Tom was checking the fence line when he heard a vehicle approaching. Not Vernon's familiar blue truck, something bigger, newer. A black SUV with tinted windows climbed the road and pulled up to the house. Tom walked back slowly, measuring his pace, not hurrying. Show no concern. Give nothing away. A man got out. He was in his 40s, well dressed in a way that looked out of place here. Dark slacks, a pressed shirt, a jacket that was too light for the mountain cold. He smiled as Tom approached, a professional smile that did not reach his eyes. "Mr. Garrett," he said, extending his hand. "Derek Sutton. I represent Apex Resource Group." Tom shook the offered hand briefly. "What can I do for you?" Derek pulled a business card from his jacket and handed it over. "We are a mineral exploration company conducting regional surveys. I was hoping you might allow our team to take some soil samples from your property. Completely non-invasive, minimal disruption. Of course, you would be compensated for the access." Tom looked at the card without reading it. "Why my property?" Derek's smile stayed in place. "We are surveying the entire region. Your property is part of our grid, standard geological assessment." "And what are you assessing for?" "Various mineral deposits, rare earth elements, precious metals, anything of commercial interest. Montana has significant untapped resources. We help identify them." Tom handed the card back. "I am not interested." Derek's smile finally slipped. "Mr. Garrett, I should mention that your grandfather refused similar requests multiple times over the years. With respect, that kind of stubbornness cost him. The minerals on this land, if they exist, could be worth substantial money. Money that could make your retirement very comfortable." "My retirement is fine." "Is it?" Derek's voice took on an edge. "You are living alone on a remote ranch, working cattle at 62 years old. No offense, but how long can you keep this up? Our offer would give you options. Security." Tom looked at Derek for a long moment. "The security of selling my land to strangers so they can tear it apart looking for minerals. That is not security. That is surrender." Derek put the card back in his pocket. "Your grandfather said something similar. He was a proud man, proud and stubborn. I hope you will think about this more carefully than he did. We will be in touch." He got back in the SUV and drove away. Tom stood watching until the dust settled. Then he walked to Vernon's ranch, following the fence line between the properties, a path he had walked several times now. Vernon was in his barn working on a tractor engine. He looked up when Tom entered, read something in his expression, and set down his wrench. "What happened?" "Man named Derek Sutton came by. Apex Resource Group. Wanted to do soil samples." Vernon's face darkened. "What did you tell him?" "No." "Good." Vernon wiped his hands on a rag. "Apex has been buying up land around here for 15 years. They offer good money, better than market value. A lot of folks have sold, but they never explain what they are really looking for. They do surveys, take samples, then either buy the property or move on. The properties they buy get fenced off. Nobody knows what they do with them after that." "You never sold to them." "They have not made me an offer yet. My land is not as interesting to them as others." Vernon paused. "Your grandfather's land, though they wanted it bad, made him offers every few years. He always refused, drove them crazy. Tom told Vernon about the journal, about the rare earth deposits Nathaniel and Jim Foster had discovered and buried, about Foster's death in 1978. Vernon listened without interrupting, his weathered face growing more serious with each revelation. When Tom finished, Vernon was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I knew some of that. Not the details, but enough. Millie, my wife, she was close with your grandfather toward the end. He told her things he did not tell most people. She believed him when he said the land held secrets worth protecting. After she died, I promised her I would keep an eye on the place, make sure nobody moved against Nathaniel while he was still alive. And now that he is gone, now they will come for you." Vernon met Tom's eyes. "You understand that, right? Whatever is buried on this land, they have waited decades for it. They will not stop because you said no once. Let them come." Vernon smiled, a small, approving smile. "You sound like your grandfather." Tom drove into Elkhorn the next day for supplies. The town was quiet, most people working their own land or inside against the November cold. He parked in front of Wayne's store and went in. Wayne was behind the register, reading a newspaper. He looked up when Tom entered and something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe, or guilt. "Mr. Garrett," Wayne said, "what can I help you with?" Tom grabbed a basket and moved through the aisles, picking up what he needed. Flour, coffee, canned goods. He was aware of Wayne watching him the entire time. When he brought his items to the counter, Wayne rang them up in silence. Bate came out from the back room carrying a box of stock. She saw Tom and smiled. "Mr. Garrett, how are you settling in?" "Good," Tom said, "learning as I go." She set down the box. "Dad told me you got the firewood all stacked. That is good. Winter comes hard up on the ridge." "So I am learning." Wayne finished ringing up the purchases and gave Tom the total. Tom paid in cash, counted out bills. As Wayne made change, Bates said, "You should come to the community dinner next week. First Saturday of every month. Good food, good people. Way to get to know your neighbors." "Maybe I will," Tom said, though he had no intention of going. He was not ready for community, for the questions and curiosity that would come with it. As he was leaving, Bate followed him out to his truck. When they were out of earshot of the store, she said quietly, "I wanted to tell you something. My father has been getting calls from Apex. They have been asking about you. When you come to town, what you buy, who you talk to." Tom set his bag in the truck bed. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because your grandfather was a good man and what they are doing is not right." Bate glanced back at the store. "My father thinks it is just business. He does not see the bigger picture, but I do. Whatever they want from your land, it is not just about minerals. They are scared of something. I can hear it in the way they ask questions." "Scared of what?" "I do not know, but be careful, Mr. Garrett. These are not people who take no for an answer." She went back inside. Tom drove home through the gathering dusk, his mind working. Apex was watching him. They had people in town reporting on his movements. The pressure was building, just as it had built on his grandfather. That night, Tom pulled out the journal again and read more carefully. He was looking for something specific now. The entry from 1978 where Nathaniel had mentioned hiding Jim Foster's maps and analysis. Hidden where only family would look, Nathaniel had written. Tom started searching. He checked behind every photograph on the walls, felt along every shelf, examined every board in the floor. Nothing. He went through his grandfather's few belongings, the clothes in the closet, the books on the shelves. Nothing. Then he looked at the portrait of Elizabeth again, the young woman with dark hair and serious eyes, his grandmother who had helped Nathaniel keep the secret, who had understood what was at stake. Tom lifted the portrait off the wall. The backing was old cardboard, yellowed with age, but tucked between the cardboard and the frame he found it. A piece of paper, folded small and tight. He unfolded it carefully. It was a hand-drawn map of the property. Tom recognized the landmarks, the house, the creek, the north pasture, the ridge, and marked at 5 different locations were symbols, small circles with a star in the center, beside each symbol a date: 1954, 1956, 1959, 1962, 1977. Tom spread the map on the table and studied it. 5 locations, 5 burial sites. His grandfather and Jim Foster had hidden the evidence in 5 places across Thunder Ridge, then documented where so it could be found again if needed. And now Tom had the map. He returned to the journal looking for the entries around those dates. The 1954 entry was the first discovery in the North Pasture. 1956, Jim and I buried more samples near the creek. If anything happens to us, someone needs to be able to prove what is here. 1959, Elizabeth insisted we document everything. She said the truth matters, even if we keep it hidden for now. The later dates had shorter entries. 1962, another cache buried on the eastern boundary. Jim is getting nervous. He thinks the government is developing technology that could detect deposits from satellites. I told him we knew this day would come eventually. 1977, final burial site completed. Everything is hidden now. Maps, samples, Jim's full analysis. If I die, whoever inherits this land will have to decide what to do with it. Tom traced the map with his finger. 5 sites. 5 pieces of evidence that would prove his grandfather and Jim Foster had discovered a massive rare earth deposit on Thunder Ridge. Evidence that Apex was probably looking for right now. The question was what to do with it. His grandfather had kept it hidden for 50 years, died protecting the secret. But Tom was not his grandfather. He had not spent his life on this land. He did not have Elizabeth's ghost keeping him here, and he was already 62. How many years did he have left to play guardian? But then he thought about Derek Sutton's smile, about Apex buying up land and fencing it off, about people like Wayne taking payments to spy on their neighbors, about Jim Foster going off a mountain road after threatening to expose the truth. Guard what you find. Do not let them take what is not theirs to claim. Tom made his decision. He would find what his grandfather had hidden. He would see for himself what was worth 50 years of solitude and a friend's life, and then he would decide what to do with it. The next morning, Tom rode Bess out to the north pasture. It was cold, the ground hard with frost. The location on the map was near a cluster of rocks, about 200 yards from where the creek bent south. Tom had the map in his pocket and a shovel strapped to Bess's saddle. He found the spot and dismounted. The ground looked undisturbed, just grass and rocks and sage like everywhere else. But when Tom started clearing away the surface growth, he found it. A flat stone, larger than the others, with a small mark scratched into its surface. A star inside a circle, the same symbol from the map. Tom used a pry bar to lift the stone. Underneath was disturbed soil, darker than the surrounding earth. He started digging. The ground was hard, frozen in places, and the work was slow. But 2 feet down, his shovel hit something solid, metal. Tom cleared the soil away carefully. It was a military ammunition box, the kind used to keep things dry and protected. It was sealed with a waterproof gasket and secured with a simple latch. Tom pulled it from the hole and set it on the grass. His hands were shaking slightly as he opened the latch. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, were samples, rocks that looked ordinary until you held them and felt their weight. They were too dense, too heavy for their size, and in certain light they showed colors that did not belong to ordinary stone. Also in the box, photographs, black and white images of geological formations, close-ups of mineral deposits, wide shots of the north pasture from different angles, and beneath the photographs, papers, handwritten notes in careful script, Jim Foster's field analysis. Tom unfolded the papers and began to read. The technical language was beyond him, terms like lanthanide series and magnetic susceptibility and parts per million. But some things were clear enough. Neodymium concentration, exceptional. Lanthanum present at significant levels. Deposit extent, minimum 40 million tons, possibly exceeding 80 million. Purity grade, above commercial threshold. And at the bottom of the analysis, written in a different hand, darker ink, words that sent a chill through Tom. Estimated strategic value, incalculable. Military applications, missile guidance, radar systems, advanced electronics. Recommendation, do not report. Government seizure certain under national security provisions. Recommend private concealment until political climate changes. The signature at the bottom, James A. Foster, Ph.D., Geological Survey, 1954. Tom sat back on his heels, holding papers that were 70 years old. His grandfather and Jim Foster had found this deposit in 1954 and decided to bury it rather than let the government seize the land. They had made a choice to protect something they believed in, even knowing it might cost them everything. And it had cost Jim Foster his life. Tom looked out across the north pasture, seeing it differently now. Beneath this grass, beneath the rocks and sage, lay something worth billions, something that could power missiles and satellites and technologies he did not understand, something men would kill for. He carefully repacked the ammunition box and buried it again, replaced the stone marker, scattered grass and dirt until the spot looked untouched. Then he rode Bess back to the house, his mind racing. He had found what his grandfather had hidden. He understood now why Apex kept making offers, why they were watching him, why they had probably killed Jim Foster when he threatened to expose the truth. The question was what came next. Tom stood on the porch of his grandfather's house and looked out at Thunder Ridge. The mountains rose against the November sky, indifferent and eternal. This land had held its secret for 70 years. Tom had inherited more than property. He had inherited a war that had been waiting all this time to be fought. And standing there, feeling the cold wind on his face, Tom Garrett knew what his grandfather would want him to do. The same thing Nathaniel had done for 50 years. The same thing that had cost him his family and his comfort and finally his life. Stand his ground, protect what was his, let them come if they wanted it, let them try to take it. Tom was done running from his life. He had found something worth fighting for. The call came at 5 in the morning, 3 days after Tom had excavated the first burial site. The phone rang in the darkness, pulling him from sleep that had been thin and troubled. Vernon's voice on the other end was weak, strained in a way Tom had never heard before. "Tom," Vernon said, "I need help, cannot drive, something is wrong." Tom was dressed and in his truck in less than 2 minutes. The roads were still dark, frost thick on the windshield. He drove fast, maybe too fast, the truck sliding on corners as he descended toward Vernon's ranch. The sky was just beginning to lighten when he pulled into the yard. He found Vernon on the bathroom floor, pale and shaking. There was vomit in the toilet on the floor. Vernon's face was gray, his breathing shallow. Tom helped him to the truck, wrapped him in a blanket, and drove to the hospital in Sheridan, 40 minutes that felt like hours. The emergency room staff took Vernon immediately. Tom sat in the waiting area, his hands still shaking from adrenaline, watching nurses and doctors move with practiced urgency behind the swinging doors. He thought about calling someone, Vernon's family, but he did not have their numbers. He just sat and waited and tried not to think about the worst possibilities. A doctor came out after 2 hours. Vernon was stable but seriously ill. Acute poisoning, the doctor said. We are running tests to determine what kind. His age is working against him. The next 24 hours will tell us a lot." Tom asked if he could see him. The doctor hesitated, then nodded. Vernon was in a bed surrounded by monitors and IV lines. His eyes were closed, his breathing assisted by oxygen. Tom sat beside the bed and took Vernon's weathered hand in his own. "I am here," Tom said quietly. "You are going to be all right." Vernon's eyes opened slightly. His voice when he spoke was barely a whisper. "Not an accident," he said. "They poisoned me, like they did to Foster." "Rest," Tom said. "We can talk later." No, Vernon's grip tightened slightly. "Listen, my daughter, Grace, in Denver, call her. She needs to know, and Tom, be careful, you are next." Vernon's eyes closed again. Tom sat with him until a nurse came and said visiting hours were over. Tom left his phone number at the desk with instructions to call if anything changed. Then he drove back to Thunder Ridge as the sun rose over the mountains, Vernon's warning echoing in his mind. Back at the ranch, Tom searched Vernon's house for contact information. He found an address book in a kitchen drawer. Grace Harper was listed with a Denver phone number. Tom called from Vernon's landline. A woman answered on the third ring. Her voice was professional, alert despite the early hour. "This is Grace Harper." Tom explained who he was, what had happened. There was a long silence on the other end. Then Grace said, "I will be there tonight. Do not let them discharge him until I arrive." She hung up before Tom could respond. He went back to the hospital and spent the day in the waiting room, drinking bad coffee and watching the clock. The test results came back in the afternoon. Arsenic poisoning. Significant levels in Vernon's blood and tissue samples. The doctor called the sheriff. Sheriff Reeves was in his 50s, heavyset, with a face that had seen too much and cared too little. He took Tom's statement in a perfunctory way, writing in a small notebook. "Any idea how Mr. Pike might have been exposed to arsenic?" "No," Tom said. "Any enemies? Anyone who might want to hurt him?" Tom thought about Apex, about the offers Vernon had refused, about the pattern of deaths surrounding people who knew about Thunder Ridge. But he had no proof, just suspicion and Vernon's whispered warning. "I do not know," Tom said. The sheriff closed his notebook. "Probably environmental exposure. Old wells can have arsenic contamination. Happens more than you would think. We will look into it." Tom watched him leave and knew that investigation would go nowhere. The sheriff had already decided what this was. Accident. Contamination. Nothing suspicious. The same conclusion that had been reached about Jim Foster's death in 1978. Grace Harper arrived at 8 that evening. Tom was still in the waiting room when she walked in. She was in her early 40s, tall, with dark hair pulled back and eyes that missed nothing. She wore a business suit and carried a leather briefcase. She looked like someone who spent her life in courtrooms and conference rooms, not hospitals and ranches. "Mr. Garrett," she said, "I am Grace." They shook hands. Her grip was firm, confident. "How is he?" "Stable. The doctors say the next 48 hours are critical." Grace nodded. She set down her briefcase and sat beside Tom. "Tell me everything." Tom told her about finding Vernon that morning, about the arsenic poisoning, about the sheriff's cursory investigation. He told her about Apex and Derek Sutton and the offers to buy land. He told her about his grandfather's journal and Jim Foster's death and the buried evidence of rare earth deposits. Grace listened without interrupting, her expression growing more serious with each detail. When Tom finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "My father called me 2 weeks ago, told me about you, about your grandfather's land. He said something was happening, that people were getting nervous. He asked me to look into Apex Resource Group, see what I could find out." "Did you?" Yes, Grace opened her briefcase and pulled out a folder. Apex is a subsidiary of Sentinel Defense Industries, major defense contractor, billions in government contracts. They have been quietly acquiring land in Montana for 20 years through various shell companies. The pattern is always the same. They identify properties with geological interest, make generous offers, and when people refuse to sell, things start to happen. Legal problems, health issues, accidents. Like my grandfather. Like a lot of people, Grace said. She pulled out more papers. I found records of 3 other geologists who worked in this region between 1960 and 1979. All of them died in accidents within 2 years of conducting surveys. Car crashes, falls, one drowning. The local investigations all concluded accidental death. Tom felt cold. 3 more plus Jim Foster, 4 geologists dead. And now my father, Grace said. Her voice was controlled, but Tom could hear the anger underneath. Arsenic poisoning is not accidental, Mr. Garrett. Someone did this to him, and I am going to find out who. Over the next 3 days, Tom split his time between the hospital and the ranch. Vernon's condition stabilized but did not improve. He drifted in and out of consciousness, too weak to talk. Grace stayed in Sheridan, working from a hotel room, making calls, pulling records, building a case. Tom used the time to investigate the remaining burial sites marked on Nathaniel's map. He woke before dawn each morning, made strong coffee, and studied the map by lamplight. Each location was marked with precise coordinates, but the landmarks had changed over 70 years. Trees had fallen. The creek had shifted its course. What Nathaniel had known by heart, Tom had to puzzle out from terrain and guesswork. The second location was near the creek, hidden beneath a fallen cottonwood that had been there for decades. Tom rode best down through the morning mist, the mare's breath making clouds in the cold air. The cottonwood was massive, its trunk 5 feet across, its branches spread like skeletal fingers across 30 feet of ground. It must have fallen in a storm years ago, maybe decades. Now it was part of the landscape, moss growing thick on its northern side, small pines sprouting from the rotted wood. Tom tied Bess to a standing pine and approached the fallen tree. He had to crawl underneath, squeezing between the trunk and the frozen ground. The space beneath was dark and smelled of decay and earth. Tom used his flashlight, sweeping the beam across exposed roots and disturbed soil. There, a flat stone, different from the creek rocks around it. Granite, probably carried up from somewhere else. Tom scraped away dirt and found the mark. A star inside a circle, scratched deep into the stone's surface. He dug carefully, aware that the massive tree trunk above him could shift if he disturbed the wrong support. His grandfather had buried this 70 years ago, when the tree was still standing. The box must have been placed when the earth was different, the landmark chosen for permanence that had ironically been destroyed by the tree's fall. 2 feet down, Tom's shovel struck metal. Another ammunition box, this one showing more corrosion from groundwater seepage near the creek. But the seal had held. Inside, wrapped in multiple layers of oilcloth, were more rock samples and a set of photographs Tom had not seen before. The photographs showed the mineral formations in cross-section. Someone, probably Jim Foster, had cut samples in half and photographed them under different lighting conditions. In natural light, they looked like ordinary rock. Under UV light, they glowed with colors that seemed impossible, blues and greens and purples that pulsed like living things. Tom sat under the fallen tree, holding photographs of stones that defied explanation, understanding why his grandfather and Foster had been so certain about what they had found. These were not ordinary minerals. They were something else entirely, something valuable beyond measure, something worth killing for. He repacked the box and buried it again, restored the dirt and scattered leaves and branches. By the time he emerged from under the cottonwood, The sun was fully up and Bess was looking at him with patient disdain. The third site was on the ridge above the house, a steep climb that left Tom breathing hard in the thin air. His legs burned with the effort. His lungs worked overtime pulling oxygen from air that seemed to have less of it with every step. Bess handled the climb better, her mountain-bred strength showing. She picked her way between rocks that would have turned Tom's ankle, found paths he would have missed. The ridge top was wind-scoured and bare except for a few twisted pines that somehow found purchase in cracks in the stone. Tom could see for miles in every direction. Vernon's ranch to the east, the town of Elkhorn distant to the south, mountains rising in every other direction, peak after peak disappearing into haze. The burial site was marked by a cairn, a stack of stones that looked natural but was too deliberate to be accidental. Tom dismantled it carefully, numbering each stone in his mind so he could rebuild it exactly. Underneath, buried just 6 inches down in a pocket of soil between 2 slabs of bedrock, was another box. This one held Jim Foster's field notebooks. 3 spiral-bound books with water-stained covers and pages filled with handwriting that started neat and grew more frantic as the entries progressed. Tom sat on the ridge reading them, the wind cold on his face, turning pages with numb fingers. The notebooks documented Foster's growing understanding of what he had discovered. The first entries from 1954 were clinical, scientific, mineral composition, density measurements, spectroscopic analysis. But as the notebooks progressed through 1955 and 1956, Foster's tone changed. If this deposit is as extensive as I believe, Foster had written in March 1956, we are looking at the largest rare earth discovery in North American history, possibly the world. The military applications alone could change the balance of power. Whoever controls this deposit controls critical supply chains for the next century. Later entries showed Foster's growing paranoia. June 1957, someone at the university has been asking about my work, questions that are too specific to be casual. I denied everything, claimed I was doing standard geological surveys, but I think they know something. Need to be more careful. September 1960, Nathaniel and I have decided to stop all active research. Everything we have found is now buried. No more sampling, no more analysis. We wait and see if the interest fades. Elizabeth supports the decision. She understands that some knowledge is dangerous to possess. The final notebook ended in 1977, a year before Foster's death. The last entry was dated November 3rd. Pressure is increasing. Montana Mining Corporation has been surveying adjacent properties. They are using new satellite imaging technology. It is only a matter of time before they confirm what is here. Nathaniel and I need to make a decision. Go public with proper environmental protections or keep hiding and hope we die before they find it. There were no more entries. Foster had died less than a year later. Tom closed the notebook and looked out at the mountains. Foster had struggled with the same choice Tom faced now, exposure or concealment. Both carried risks. Both could end in death. The fourth site was near the eastern property line, close to where Vernon's land bordered Tom's. Tom approached it carefully, aware that he was on the edge of his own property, technically crossing into space that might be under Vernon's control. But the map was clear. This site sat exactly on the boundary line. The landmark was a lightning-struck pine, dead for decades but still standing, its trunk split down the middle by some long-ago storm. Tom dug at its base and found the box buried deep, 4 feet down, as if Nathaniel had wanted this one especially hidden. Inside were maps, not hand-drawn sketches like the one Tom had found behind Elizabeth's portrait, but professional geological surveys with topographical overlays and mineral density projections. The maps showed the deposit spreading across both properties, maybe 300 acres in total, with the highest concentrations on Tom's land but significant amounts extending onto Vernon's ranch. Vernon had known, Tom realized again, or at least suspected. That was why he had never sold, why he had watched over Nathaniel all those years, why he had been poisoned when he stood with Tom. Vernon had been protecting his own land and his neighbors, keeping the secret even without knowing all the details. Tom photographed every map, every annotation, every note in the margins. Then he reburied the box and rode back toward the ranch, the afternoon sun slanting through the pines, casting long shadows across the frozen ground. The fifth and final site was the hardest to reach, deep in timber on the northwestern corner of the property. Tom had to hike in, leaving Bess tied at the tree line. The box here held the most damning evidence. Government documents from 1952 classified reports that Foster had somehow obtained. They detailed a nationwide search for domestic rare earth sources, strategies for securing mineral rights, legal frameworks for invoking eminent domain under national security provisions. And there was a list, names of geologists recruited to conduct covert surveys. Jim Foster's name was on the list. So were the names of the 3 other geologists Grace had found, the ones who had died in accidents. And at the bottom of the document, a signature Tom recognized from the newspaper articles he had read. Martin Chase, then a junior analyst at the Department of Interior, now senior vice president of Apex Resource Group. Tom photographed everything with his phone, uploaded the images to a cloud storage account, then carefully reburied the boxes. He rode back to the ranch as the sun set, his mind working. The conspiracy was bigger than he had imagined. It reached back 70 years, involved government agencies and defense contractors, and had left a trail of bodies in its wake. That night Grace came to the ranch. She looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes, but there was a fierce energy about her. "I have been digging into the sheriff," she said. "His name is Carl Reeves. His father was Wade Reeves, the sheriff in 1978 when Jim Foster died." Tom felt the pieces clicking together, the same family. The same family that took payoffs from Montana Mining Corporation to make problems disappear. Grace spread papers on Tom's kitchen table. "I found the records. Payments to Wade Reeves between 1975 and 1980 listed as consulting fees. And guess who signed the checks? Martin Chase. The same man now running Apex. The same man." Grace looked at Tom. "This is a multi-generational conspiracy, Mr. Garrett. They have been protecting this secret and eliminating threats for 70 years. My father is just the latest victim." Tom showed her the documents he had found, the photographs he had taken. Grace went through them methodically, her lawyer's mind organizing the evidence. "This is incredible," she said. "This proves everything. The deposits, the cover-up, the murders. With this, we can go public, force a real investigation. Or we can become the next accidents," Tom said. Grace looked up at him. "What are you suggesting?" "I am suggesting we need to be very careful about who we trust and when we move." Tom thought about Derek Sutton's visits, about Wayne Hutchins taking money to spy on him, about the sheriff who had already decided Vernon's poisoning was accidental. They have people everywhere. In the town, in law enforcement, probably in the state government. We go public too soon, we end up like Foster. So what do? We build an insurance policy. Tom pulled out his laptop. We document everything, upload it to multiple locations, set up dead man switches. If anything happens to us, it all goes public automatically. Then we find someone we can trust. A journalist, maybe. Someone with a platform big enough that killing them would draw too much attention. Grace nodded slowly. "I know someone. Marcus Webb, investigative reporter for the Billings Gazette. He has been covering land disputes and corporate corruption in Montana for years. He is honest, thorough, and he does not back down. Can you trust him? My father trusted him. That is good enough for me. They spent the rest of the night uploading documents, setting up cloud backups, creating a network of redundancy. If Apex wanted to bury this, they would have to bury the entire internet. By dawn, they had a system in place. Grace sent an encrypted email to Marcus Webb with a selection of the evidence and a request to meet. Tom drove to the hospital that morning to check on Vernon. He was awake, sitting up slightly, color returning to his face. The doctors said the worst had passed. Vernon would recover, though it would take time. Tom sat beside the bed and told him what they had found, what they were planning. Vernon listened, nodding occasionally. When Tom finished, Vernon said, "You are doing the right thing. But be ready. When they realize you are not backing down, they will escalate." How much worse can it get? Vernon looked at him seriously. They killed 4 geologists and tried to kill me. Worse than that is not hard to imagine. Tom drove back to Thunder Ridge thinking about Vernon's warning. He was so focused on his thoughts that he almost missed the black SUV parked at his house. Not Derek Sutton's vehicle. A different one, larger, with government plates. 2 men stood on his porch. They wore suits and had the bearing of federal agents or lawyers. Tom parked and approached cautiously. "Thomas Garrett," one of them said. "I am Richard Cole, representing Sentinel Defense Industries. This is my colleague, James Park. We would like to discuss your property." "I am not interested in selling," Tom said. "We are not here to make an offer," Cole said. "We are here to inform you of a legal matter. Sentinel has filed a petition in federal court seeking condemnation of your property under eminent domain provisions. National security interest. The rare earth deposits on your land are classified as strategic materials essential to defense applications." Tom felt his stomach drop. "You cannot do that." "We can and we have," Cole said. He handed Tom a thick envelope. "These are the court documents. You have 30 days to respond. I would suggest you get a lawyer, a good one." They got back in their SUV and left. Tom stood holding the envelope, feeling the weight of what it contained. They were not trying to buy the land anymore. They were taking it, using the full power of the federal government to claim what his grandfather had protected for 50 years. He called Grace. She was at the hospital with Vernon. When Tom told her about the eminent domain petition, there was a long silence on the other end. "They are moving faster than I expected," Grace said. "This is aggressive. They must be worried about something." "About us going public?" "Probably, but eminent domain cases take time. Months, sometimes years. They have to prove national security interest, justify the taking, go through review processes. We have time to fight this." "Can we win?" Honestly, Grace sighed. Eminent domain for national security is very hard to defeat, but we can make it expensive. We can force discovery, expose the conspiracy, drag Martin Chase and everyone else into depositions. Even if we lose the land, we can make sure the truth comes out. Tom looked out at Thunder Ridge, at the mountains his grandfather had loved enough to die protecting. "Maybe that is enough," he said. That evening Marcus Webb arrived. He was in his late 30s, lean and intense, with the restless energy of someone always chasing the next story. He shook Tom's hand and Grace's, then sat at the kitchen table and listened while they laid out everything. The deposits, the deaths, the cover-up, the evidence. They showed him documents, photographs, the journal entries. Marcus took notes, asked sharp questions, verified details. When they finished, Marcus sat back and whistled softly. "This is the biggest story I have ever seen. If even half of this is true, it is Pulitzer level. Multiple murders, government conspiracy, corporate corruption spanning 7 decades. "It is all true," Grace said. We have the evidence. Then I need to move fast, Marcus said. I will start with a preliminary story, something to get it on record, establish the basic facts. Then I will do a deeper investigation, interview sources, build the case. With your permission, I would like to use the documents you have provided. You have our permission, Tom said, but be careful. People who have gotten close to this story have ended up dead. Marcus nodded. I understand the risks, but this is what I do. Expose corruption. Hold power accountable. If they come after me, they come after a reporter with a public platform and legal protections. It will not be as easy as making a geologist disappear. The next morning, Tom woke to the sound of a vehicle in his yard. He looked out the window and saw a familiar truck, Daniel's rental. Tom's son had arrived without warning, without calling. Tom felt his stomach tighten. He knew what this was before Daniel even got out of the truck. Tom went outside. Daniel was getting out dressed in expensive casual clothes that looked ridiculous in the ranch setting, pressed khakis, a polo shirt, loafers that would be ruined in the mud. He looked around at the ranch with an expression Tom could not quite read. Disapproval, maybe, or concern, or calculation. Dad, Daniel said, we need to talk. They sat on the porch, the same porch where Tom had sat with Vernon a dozen times, learning about the land and the seasons and what it meant to stand for something. Now he sat with his son and felt the distance between them like a physical thing. Daniel pulled papers from his briefcase, the same kind of expensive leather case that Martin Chase had carried, that Derek Sutton had carried. The briefcase of people who made their living moving money and writing contracts. I have been contacted by Sentinel's legal team, he said. Tom said nothing, let him talk. They showed me documents. Medical evaluations suggesting you might be experiencing cognitive decline. Living alone in a remote location, making irrational decisions about property worth millions, refusing reasonable business offers, associating yourself with conspiracy theories about murders and government cover-ups. These are not conspiracy theories, Tom said quietly. These are facts. Dad, Daniel set down the briefcase. I am worried about you. You are 62 years old, living on a mountain you knew nothing about 4 months ago. You have never ranched in your life. You are refusing offers that could set you up for the rest of your life. And you are talking about people being murdered over rocks in the ground. Rare earth minerals worth billions of dollars. And yes, people have been murdered. Vernon was just poisoned. Your grandfather's friend was killed in a staged accident. 3 other geologists died under suspicious circumstances. This is real, Daniel. Or it is grief making you see patterns that are not there. Daniel leaned forward. Mom died less than a year ago. You sold the house, left everything you knew, moved to the middle of nowhere. From a psychological perspective, this looks like a breakdown. And these people, Sentinel, they are using that. They are positioning you as mentally incompetent so they can bypass your resistance. So you are here to help them do that. I am here to help you, Dad. Daniel pulled out more papers. I had a lawyer draw up power of attorney documents. Give me the authority to manage your affairs, handle the legal issues with Sentinel. I can negotiate a better deal than you will get fighting them. They are offering $20 million now. $20 million. Do you understand what that means? You would never have to worry about money again. You could see the world. Visit Rebecca in Boston. Spend time with your grandchildren who barely know you. Tom thought about his grandchildren. Daniel's 2 kids who he saw maybe once a year, awkward visits where everyone was polite and distant. Rebecca's daughter who called him grandpa, Tom like he was a stranger who happened to share DNA. Children raised to be successful and comfortable and disconnected from anything that mattered. My grandchildren do not know me because you have not taught them who I am, Tom said. You have taught them that success means money and career and the right schools. You have not taught them about standing for something, about fighting for what is right even when it is hard. Because fighting for principle does not pay the mortgage, Dad. Daniel's voice rose slightly. It does not put food on the table or send kids to college. Grandpa's principles kept him poor and alone his whole life. Mom's father threw away every opportunity because he was too stubborn to see reason. And now you are doing the same thing. Your grandfather was not stubborn, Tom said. He was principled. There is a difference. He chose to protect something that mattered more than money. He chose to stand against power that wanted to take what was his. That is not weakness. That is strength. It is foolishness. Daniel pushed the papers across. Sign these, Dad. Let me handle this. Let me negotiate a settlement that gives you security and dignity. Before you lose everything fighting a battle you cannot possibly win. Tom looked at the power of attorney documents. They were professionally prepared, full of legal language he barely understood, but the meaning was clear enough. Sign these and Daniel would have control. Control of the property, control of negotiations with Sentinel, control of Tom's life. You think I am going to hand over my rights because you are scared I will embarrass you? Tom asked quietly. Because fighting a corporation is inconvenient for your career. Because your father is supposed to be retired and quiet and manageable. It is not about me, Daniel said, but the strain in his voice suggested otherwise. It is about you, about keeping you safe, about making sure you have something left when this is over. Sentinel has unlimited resources. They have lawyers, politicians, government connections. You have what? An old rancher's journal and some rocks buried in the ground. You cannot win this, Dad. Maybe not, but I can lose it on my terms. I can lose it standing up, fighting for what is right, making them work for every inch. That is more than I accomplished in 30 years at the factory, more than I accomplished in my marriage, more than I have accomplished in my whole careful, safe, managed life. You are being selfish, Daniel said, and there was real anger in his voice now. You are throwing away millions of dollars that could help your family because of some romantic notion about principles and land. Rebecca and I, we could use that money. Your grandchildren could use it. But you would rather die on this hill playing cowboy than think about anyone but yourself. The words hit hard because there was truth in them. Tom was being selfish. He was choosing this fight over his children's comfort, over his grandchildren's inheritance. But he was also choosing something else. Choosing to be the man Helen had asked him to be. Choosing to honor the grandfather he had never known. Choosing to stand for something instead of just existing. I am sorry you see it that way, Tom said, but these are my rights to give away or keep, and I am keeping them. I will fight Sentinel. I will lose, probably, but I will lose knowing I did not yield just because they wanted me to. Daniel gathered his papers and stood. His face was tight with frustration and something that looked like grief. I tried, he said. When this goes wrong, when you are broke and alone and wondering why nobody stood with you, remember I tried to help. You tried to help Sentinel take my land, Tom said. That is not the same as helping me. Daniel walked to his truck. He paused at the door, looked back. Mom would be ashamed of you, he said. She would see you throwing away security for pride and she would be ashamed. Tom felt that like a punch, but he kept his voice steady. Your mother told me before she died to find something, something worth fighting for. She would understand this, Daniel, even if you do not. Daniel got in the truck and drove away without another word. Tom sat on the porch and watched the dust settle. His son thought he was crazy. His children wanted him to give up, take the money, be sensible. They did not understand that he had been sensible his whole life and it had left him empty. This was the first thing Tom had ever fought for that mattered. Win or lose, it was his fight, and he would see it through. Grace arrived that afternoon with news. Marcus Webb's preliminary story had published online that morning. Already it was getting traction, picked up by regional news sites, shared on social media. The headline was simple but powerful. Montana rancher alleges 70-year conspiracy over rare earth deposits. The article laid out the basic facts. The discovery in 1954, Jim Foster's death, the buried evidence, the eminent domain petition. Marcus had written it carefully, attributing everything to Tom and Grace's claims, presenting documents as alleged evidence, protecting himself legally while making the story compelling. "This will force their hand," Grace said. "They cannot just make you disappear now. Too many people know." Tom hoped she was right, but he also knew that exposure did not guarantee safety. Foster had threatened to go public. Vernon had tried to protect the secret. Both had been targeted. Visibility might slow Apex down, but it would not stop them. That night the hospital called. Vernon had taken a turn for the worse. His kidneys were failing, stress from the arsenic poisoning compounding his age. Grace and Tom drove to Sheridan together, arriving just after midnight. Vernon was unconscious, his breathing labored even with oxygen assistance. The doctor was frank. "He is in organ failure. At his age, with the damage from the poisoning, we are looking at hours, not days. I am sorry." Grace sat beside her father's bed, holding his hand, tears running silently down her face. Tom stood at the window, looking out at the dark parking lot, feeling helpless rage. Vernon had been his friend, his teacher, his ally in this fight. And now he was dying because he had stood with Tom against power that would not tolerate resistance. Vernon died at 4 in the morning. His breathing simply stopped, the monitors going flat. Grace held him through it, whispering things Tom could not hear. When it was over, she stood and wiped her eyes and looked at Tom with an expression of absolute determination. "They killed him," she said, "just like they killed Foster and the others, and we are going to prove it." They drove back to Thunder Ridge in silence as dawn broke over the mountains. Grace went straight to her laptop, pulling up files, making calls. Tom made coffee and sat watching her work. She was methodical, organized, channeling her grief into action. After 2 hours, she turned to Tom. "I pulled Vernon's medical records. The arsenic levels in his blood, the timing of exposure, the specific compound used. Then I requested the autopsy records for Jim Foster. It took some pressure, but I got them. The arsenic signatures match. Same compound, same dosage pattern, same method of delivery." "What does that mean?" "It means whoever poisoned my father used the exact same technique that killed Foster in 1978. Grace showed him the toxicology reports side by side. "This is not coincidence. This is someone using a proven method. Someone who knew how Foster was killed and replicated it." "Martin Chase," Tom said. "He was involved in both. Young analyst in 1978, senior executive now." Grace nodded. "We need to get this to Marcus. This connects the deaths across 47 years. This proves the conspiracy is ongoing and active." They spent the rest of the day documenting everything. Grace wrote a detailed legal brief connecting the evidence. Tom organized the photographs and documents. They compiled timelines, maps, analysis. By evening, they had a comprehensive package that told the whole story from beginning to end. Marcus Webb came to the ranch that night. He looked at the new evidence with growing excitement. "This is it," he said. "This is what we need. The toxicology match, the timeline, the documents. This proves systematic murder over decades." "When can you publish?" Grace asked. "I need a few days to verify some details, get comments from Sentinel and government officials. But soon, very soon." Marcus looked at them both. "You understand this will bring a firestorm. Federal investigations, media attention, lawsuits. Your lives will not be private anymore." "Good," Grace said. "Let them come. My father spent his life avoiding conflict, being the quiet neighbor who did not make trouble, and they killed him anyway. I am done being quiet." Tom thought about his grandfather, alone on this mountain for 50 years, protecting a secret nobody believed. About Helen telling him to find something worth fighting for. About the choice between comfort and principle that defined who a man really was. "I am ready," Tom said. Marcus left with the evidence. Grace stayed at the ranch that night, too exhausted to drive back to Sheridan. They sat on the porch in the cold November dark, wrapped in blankets, watching stars. "Thank you," Grace said after a long silence, "for standing with my father, for caring when nobody else did. He was a good man. He taught me how to be a rancher, how to be stubborn in the right ways." Grace smiled slightly. That was his gift. Stubborn kindness. She paused. "What happens next with the eminent domain case?" "We fight it. Make them prove their case in court. Expose every detail. Even if we lose the land, we make sure everyone knows what they did to get it. And if they come after us, like they came after my father, then we make sure the truth survives us." Tom looked out at Thunder Ridge, dark against the stars. "That is what my grandfather did. He did not win, but he kept the truth alive long enough for someone else to carry it forward. Maybe that is all any of us can do." They sat in silence, two people bound together by grief and purpose, waiting for the storm they knew was coming. Somewhere in the darkness, forces were moving. Lawyers preparing arguments, executives making calls, people who had protected this secret for 70 years deciding how to respond to exposure. But Tom Garrett was no longer afraid. He had found what Helen had told him to find. Not just the land, not just the fight, but himself. The man he had always been underneath, the factory worker and the dutiful husband and the invisible father. A man who could stand his ground. A man who would not yield just because yielding was easier. The land beneath Thunder Ridge held its secrets still. Rare earth elements worth billions buried in ancient stone. But the land had given up something more valuable than minerals. It had given Tom a reason to stand. And he would stand until they moved him or buried him beside his grandfather on the ridge. Some battles were worth fighting not because you would win, but because losing without fighting was not living at all. And Tom Garrett had spent enough of his life not really living. Now, standing on his grandfather's land with the mountains rising around him, and the truth finally coming into the light, Tom was alive in ways that terrified and thrilled him in equal measure. Let them come. Let them bring their lawyers and their power and their money. He would be here on his land, standing his ground. Just like Nathaniel had stood before him. Some legacies were not meant to be inherited peacefully. Some had to be fought for, earned in blood and sweat and stubborn refusal to yield. Tom had inherited the fight, and he would see it through to whatever end waited on the other side. Marcus Webb's full investigation published 3 days after Vernon's funeral. The story ran on the front page of the Billings Gazette and was immediately picked up by the Associated Press. By noon, it was everywhere. CNN, the New York Times, the Washington Post, regional news stations across Montana and Wyoming. Social media exploded with shares and comments and outrage. The headline was simple and devastating. 70 years of murder. How a defense contractor killed to control Montana's rare earth deposits. Marcus had done his work well. The article laid out the entire conspiracy in methodical detail. The 1954 discovery, Jim Foster's analysis, the decision to bury the evidence, the pattern of death spanning 7 decades, the toxicology match between Foster and Vernon, Martin Chase's signature on documents connecting him to both eras, the eminent domain petition filed just days after Vernon's death. government complicity in the cover-up. And photographs. Marcus had included photographs of the rock samples under UV light, showing colors that seemed impossible. Scans of Foster's field notebooks. Copies of the 1952 government documents with their classified stamps and redacted sections. Images of Vernon in his hospital bed days before he died. The public response was immediate and fierce. Montana's senators demanded federal investigations. Environmental groups called for prosecution. Veterans organizations rallied around Tom, a fellow veteran standing against corporate power. The hashtag that emerged was simple: Stand with Brennan. Within 48 hours, it was trending nationally. Tom woke on the third day after publication to find his yard full of vehicles. Not Sentinel's black SUVs. Pickup trucks. Old Fords and Chevys and Dodges with Montana and Wyoming plates. Ranchers he had never met were arriving, parking along his road, walking up to his porch. The first was Dutch Coleman, a man in his 70s with a face like weathered granite and eyes that had seen combat. Tom recognized the look. Vietnam, probably. Maybe Korea. Dutch extended his hand and Tom shook it. "Read about what they did to Vernon," Dutch said. "Read about what they are trying to do to you. My ranch is 40 miles south. My father fought to keep our land in the 80s when the bank wanted to foreclose. Vernon's father helped him. Now I am here to help you." More came throughout the morning. Ranchers who had known Nathaniel. Neighbors who had watched Vernon stand against outside pressure for decades. Young families who worked land their grandparents had homesteaded. They brought supplies, food, firewood, tools, and they brought themselves ready to stand between Tom and whatever came next. Grace arrived from Sheridan with a truck full of legal documents and a determination that burned like cold fire. She had been working nonstop since Vernon's death, filing motions, gathering evidence, building the legal case that would expose everything. Her eyes were red-rimmed from lack of sleep, but her voice was steady. "We have a problem," she said, spreading papers on Tom's kitchen table. "Sentinel is moving faster than expected. They have petitioned for expedited proceedings on the eminent domain case, claiming urgent national security interest. The hearing is in 2 weeks." 2 weeks, Tom looked at the documents. Can they do that? They are doing it. Grace pointed to official seals, judges' signatures. They have connections at every level. Federal court, Department of Interior, Pentagon. They are calling in favors, applying pressure. The judge assigned to the case is known for ruling in favor of government interests. So we have 2 weeks to prepare a defense. We have 2 weeks to change public opinion so much that the government cannot afford to side with Sentinel. Grace pulled out her laptop. Marcus's story helped, but we need more. We need this to be so visible that burying it would be political suicide. How do we do that? We make this a movement, not just a legal case. Grace's fingers flew across the keyboard. We organize. We rally support. We turn this into a symbol that matters to people beyond Montana: family land rights, corporate accountability, government overreach. These are issues that resonate across the country. Over the next week, Grace orchestrated a campaign that would have impressed a political operative. She coordinated with environmental groups who saw the case as precedent for corporate land grabs. She reached out to veterans organizations who framed it as a veteran defending his property against a defense contractor. She connected with libertarian groups who saw it as government tyranny. She brought together coalitions that normally opposed each other, united by the simple principle that Tom's land was his to keep or lose on his own terms. And she organized a town hall meeting. It was held in Elkhorn on a Saturday night, in the high school gymnasium that normally hosted basketball games. Grace had posted notices, made calls, reached out through every network she could find. She expected maybe 50 people, 100 if they were lucky. 300 showed up. Tom stood at the back of the gymnasium and watched them file in. Ranchers in work clothes and worn boots, young couples with children, veterans in unit caps and faded jackets, environmental activists with clipboards, journalists with cameras and recorders. The bleachers filled. Then people stood along the walls. Then they crowded in the doorway, standing 3 deep, listening. Grace took the microphone. She was not a natural speaker, more comfortable with legal briefs than public addresses, but her voice carried conviction that needed no polish. She told Vernon's story. A man who had worked his land for 70 years, who had helped his neighbors, who had asked for nothing but to be left alone. A man who was poisoned because he stood with his neighbor against a corporation that wanted what was not theirs to take. She told Tom's story. A veteran who had lost his wife, who had come to Montana to understand his grandfather, who had discovered a conspiracy that had killed multiple people over 7 decades. A man who was now standing against that same power, risking everything to protect the principle that mattered more than money. And she told Nathaniel's story. A man who had protected a secret for 50 years because he believed a person's land was sacred. Who had died alone but had passed on the fight to someone willing to carry it forward. When Grace finished speaking, the gymnasium was silent. Then someone started clapping. Then another. Then the entire room was on its feet, applause echoing off the concrete walls and metal rafters. Dutch Coleman stood and spoke. "I fought in Vietnam," he said. "Saw friends die for principles they believed in. When I came home, I thought those days were behind me. But watching what is happening to Tom Garrett, I realize the fight never ends. It just changes location. I am standing with Tom. Anyone else?" Hands went up across the room. Dozens, then 100, then more than Tom could count. People calling out their names, their ranches, their commitment. "We stand with you. We will not let them take your land. We will not let them win." Tom felt something break inside him, some wall he had built around his grief and isolation. These people, strangers most of them, were offering to fight his battle alongside him. Not for money, not for recognition, for principle, for the simple belief that some things were worth defending even when the odds were impossible. The next morning, Tom's property looked like a protest camp. Tents had sprung up in the pasture. People had parked RVs and campers along the road. Fires burned in barrels, coffee brewing, food cooking. Men and women in work clothes stood in groups, talking, planning, organizing. Some had brought weapons, rifles and shotguns they displayed openly. Montana was an open carry state, and these were people who knew their rights. Grace coordinated it all with efficiency that came from years of organizing legal teams. She divided people into shifts. Someone always watching the road. Someone always monitoring the news. Someone always ready to document whatever happened next. She set up a media center in Tom's barn, with cameras and streaming equipment provided by supporters who knew technology. "If they come," Grace said, "the whole world will be watching." Former members of Tom's military unit started arriving. Men he had not seen in 40 years who had tracked him down through veterans networks, who remembered serving with him in Vietnam. They came from across the country. California, Texas, Florida, New York. Gray-haired men in their 60s and 70s, some walking with canes, some still carrying themselves like the soldiers they had been. Ray Martinez was first. He had been Tom's squad leader, a man who had saved Tom's life during a mortar attack in 1969. Ray showed up in a truck with California plates, wearing his old unit patch on his jacket. "Heard you were in a fight," Ray said. "Figured you could use some backup. You drove 20 hours to stand with me." Ray shrugged. "We stood together in worse places. This is just Montana." More veterans arrived. Jim Chen, who had worked alongside Tom building bridges under fire; Robert Washington, who had carried wounded men through jungle while being shot at; Eddie Kowalski, who still had shrapnel in his leg from a mine that had almost killed them both. They set up camp with military precision, perimeter watch, communication protocols, defensive positions that could be held if necessary. They were old men now, their fighting days long behind them, but the discipline remained. The brotherhood remained. And when Tom walked among them, checking their positions, thanking them for coming, he felt something he had not felt since Helen died. He felt like he belonged to something larger than himself. Sentinel's response came on the 8th day after Marcus's article published. Not a phone call or a letter. Action. Tom was working in the barn when he heard the vehicles approaching. Multiple engines moving fast. He walked out to find the road filled with black SUVs and unmarked vans. 10 vehicles, maybe more. Men got out, not in suits this time, in tactical gear. Black uniforms, body armor, weapons on their hips. They moved with professional coordination, fanning out around the property, taking positions. Tom counted at least 30 of them, maybe more, arriving in vehicles still on the road. A man with silver hair got out of the lead SUV. Martin Chase himself, senior vice president of Sentinel Defense Industries. The man whose signature appeared on documents spanning 7 decades of conspiracy. He walked to where Tom stood with Grace and a dozen supporters, his expression neutral, his voice calm. "Mr. Garrett," Chase said, "I am here to inform you that Sentinel Defense Industries has obtained a federal court order authorizing immediate survey and assessment of this property pending eminent domain proceedings. You and your associates need to vacate the premises within 1 hour." Tom looked at the tactical teams surrounding his property. "Show me the order." Chase handed him a document. It had official seals, a federal judge's signature, legal language that Tom barely understood. Grace took it and read quickly, her expression darkening. "This is not legitimate," Grace said. "There has been no hearing, no due process. This is a unilateral seizure order that violates multiple constitutional protections. It is a national security action authorized under the Defense Production Act," Chase said. "Your objections can be filed with the court, but this property is now under federal control. Vacate or be removed." Tom looked at the armed men surrounding them. He thought about Vernon dying in a hospital bed, about Jim Foster going off a mountain road, about his grandfather standing alone against this same power for 50 years. He thought about the veterans camped on his land, men who had fought for principles in jungles half a world away, about the ranchers who had come to stand with a neighbor they barely knew. "No," Tom said. Chase's expression did not change. "Mr. Garrett, these men are authorized to use necessary force. I strongly suggest you reconsider." "Use your force, then." Tom gestured at the cameras already filming, at the people gathering, at the tents and vehicles filling his property. "Do it in front of 300 witnesses and live cameras streaming to thousands of people. Let the whole country watch you take a veteran's land at gunpoint for a corporation." Chase hesitated. His eyes moved to the cameras, to the crowd growing larger every moment. People were emerging from tents, walking up from the road, forming a human wall between the tactical teams and the house. Dutch Coleman stepped forward, his voice carried across the yard. "I am Cornelius Coleman, United States Army, retired. I served in Vietnam. These men standing with me are veterans. We swore an oath to defend the Constitution against enemies foreign and domestic. That oath does not expire. This land belongs to Tom Garrett. You want to take it, you go through us first." More veterans stepped forward. Ray Martinez, Jim Chen, Robert Washington, men in their 60s and 70s, some with canes, some with old injuries that still pained them. but standing straight, shoulders back, facing down men half their age with weapons and body armor. Chase made a call on his phone, spoke quietly, then turned back to Tom. "You are making a serious mistake. This order will be enforced. If not today, then tomorrow. If not by these men, then by federal marshals. You cannot win this fight." "Maybe not," Tom said, "but I can make you earn it. I can make you do it in broad daylight with the whole world watching. I can make it cost you more than you want to pay." Chase got back in his SUV. The tactical teams withdrew to their vehicles but did not leave. They repositioned along the road, blocking access, maintaining a perimeter. A siege, Tom realized. They would wait, apply pressure, make life difficult until Tom had no choice but to yield. The standoff began. The first night was tense. Tom and his supporters maintained watch and shifts, 2-hour rotations, everyone armed and alert. The tactical teams did the same, sitting in their vehicles with engines running, headlights cutting through the darkness. The temperature dropped below freezing. Frost formed thick on windshields. Breath made clouds in the cold air. Tom walked the perimeter at 3 in the morning, checking on his people. Found Ray Martinez at the Eastern Watch Post, sitting in a camp chair with a thermos of coffee and his old service rifle across his lap. "Cannot sleep?" Ray asked. "Not with them out there," Tom said, nodding toward the tactical vehicles visible down the road. Ray poured Tom coffee from his thermos. "You remember Quang Tri Province, winter of '69. Tom remembered. They had been pinned down for 3 days by enemy forces, cold rain turning everything to mud, supplies running low, wondering if they would make it out. "We held our ground then," Ray said, "against worse odds than this. These men, they have body armor and fancy vehicles, but they do not have what we have." "What is that?" Ray smiled. "A reason to be here. They are being paid. We chose to come." Tom sat with Ray until dawn broke, watching the tactical teams, sipping coffee that tasted like it had been made over a campfire, feeling the weight and comfort of friendship that had lasted 50 years. Morning brought media. News vans lined the road outside the tactical perimeter. Reporters set up cameras, did live shots with the standoff visible behind them. The story dominated morning news shows. Cable networks ran continuous coverage. Every hour brought new developments, new statements from politicians, new shows of support from around the country. Grace coordinated media strategy from the barn that had become command center. She gave interviews, provided sound bites, framed the narrative. "This is not about one man's land," she told CNN. "This is about whether corporations can use government power to take what they want. This is about whether standing up to power still matters in America." The hashtag exploded. Stand with Brennan trended #1 nationally. Celebrities tweeted support. Politicians across the spectrum issued statements. Conservative groups framed it as property rights. Liberal groups framed it as corporate accountability. Somehow, the story had become a rare point of agreement across America's divided landscape. By afternoon of the first day, the tactical teams were showing strain. They had expected quick resolution. Orders followed, property secured, Tom removed. Instead, they sat in vehicles surrounded by cameras and protesters and veterans who were not backing down. Some of the tactical contractors started looking uncomfortable. This was not what they had signed up for. Tom's phone rang constantly. Reporters requesting interviews. Supporters offering help. Lawyers volunteering services. He let Grace handle most of it, focusing instead on maintaining the perimeter, keeping his people fed and warm and alert. The second day brought unexpected reinforcements. A convoy of motorcycles arrived, 20 riders wearing leather and patches from veterans' motorcycle clubs. Big men with gray beards and tattooed arms, They set up camp at the entrance to Tom's property and made it clear they were not moving. The president of the club was a man named Frank Russo, Vietnam vet, retired steelworker. "We heard about what was happening," Frank said. "Heard a brother was standing against corporate bullshit. So we came." More groups arrived through the day. A church group from Billings bringing food and supplies. College students from the university organizing support rallies. Environmental activists setting up information tables. The encampment grew from a few dozen to over 100 people, all committed to staying until the standoff resolved. The tactical teams watched this growth with visible concern. What had seemed like a simple enforcement action had become a public relations nightmare. They were surrounded by cameras, outnumbered by protesters, facing veterans who had combat experience and were not intimidated by body armor and weapons. On the third day, the tactical team leader approached under a white flag. He was a former Marine. Tom could tell from the bearing and the tattoo visible on his neck. He walked to where Tom stood with Dutch and Ray, his hands visible and empty. "We need to talk," he said. Tom nodded. "Speak." "My men and we signed contracts to provide security services. We were told this was a standard enforcement action. Nobody told us we would be facing veterans and families and media coverage that makes us look like corporate thugs." "You are corporate thugs," Dutch said flatly. The team leader grimaced. "Maybe, but we are also Americans. Most of my guys are former military. We do not like this any more than you do." His voice dropped. "I cannot tell my men to stand down. I have contracts obligations. But I can tell you this off the record. We are not going to escalate. If federal marshals arrive with legitimate authority, we will leave. We are just private security, not storm troopers." Tom studied the man, saw the conflict in his eyes, the discomfort with the mission he had been given. "Thank you for telling me that." The tactical leader nodded and walked back to his vehicles. An hour later, they started pulling out. Not all at once, but gradually, vehicles leaving one at a time. By evening, only 3 vehicles remained, a token presence that made clear Sentinel had not abandoned the property but also had not won. Tom stood on his porch watching the last tactical vehicle disappear down the road. Felt Grace come stand beside him. "They are regrouping," Grace said. "This was just round 1. "I know, but we held." "Yes," Grace said, "we held." The media arrived in force. Network news vans, regional stations, independent journalists. They set up along the road outside the tactical perimeter, cameras trained on the confrontation, reporters doing live updates every hour. The story had become national news. Cable networks ran segments. Talk shows debated it. Politicians issued statements. Support poured in through social media and phone calls and emails. Environmental groups pledged legal assistance. Veterans organizations called for federal intervention to protect Tom's rights. Civil liberties advocates framed it as government overreach. The diverse coalition Grace had built was mobilizing, applying pressure from every direction. On the second day, federal marshals arrived. Real law enforcement with legitimate authority. They examined the court order Chase had presented and declared it invalid. Insufficient due process. Procedural irregularities. The order was suspended pending proper hearings. The tactical teams had no choice but to withdraw. Chase watched from his SUV as his men packed up and left, his face expressionless but his eyes cold with calculation. As he drove past Tom, he rolled down his window. "This is not over," Chase said. "We have other options." Tom watched them go and felt no relief. Chase was right. This was a pause, not a victory. Sentinel had resources and patience. They would regroup and return with a different strategy. The fight was far from over. That night Tom's phone rang, a number he recognized. Daniel, Tom hesitated, then answered. Dad, Daniel said. His voice was different, strained. I saw the news, saw the standoff, saw those men with guns surrounding your property. Tom waited, let his son talk. I was wrong, Daniel continued. I thought you were being stubborn, throwing away your future for pride. But watching it on television, seeing those veterans stand with you, hearing Marcus's reporting about what they did to Vernon, to all those geologists, I understand now. This is not about money. This is about something bigger. Tom felt his throat tighten. What are you saying? I am saying I am sorry. I let Sentinel use me. I tried to take away your rights because I was scared and greedy and I did not believe you. I was wrong. And if you will let me, I want to help. I am a lawyer. I know how these people work. Let me join Grace's team. Let me fight for you instead of against you. Tom closed his eyes, felt something release in his chest, something that had been locked tight since Daniel had tried to force the power of attorney. Come home, Tom said. We can use all the help we can get. Daniel arrived the next morning. He looked tired, his expensive clothes rumpled, his confident lawyer demeanor gone. He stood in Tom's yard and looked at the encampment, at the veterans in their old unit patches, at the ranchers who had brought their families to stand watch. This is incredible, Daniel said quietly. All these people for you. For a principal, Tom corrected. I am just the one it landed on this time. Daniel met with Grace and spent the day reviewing legal documents, planning strategy. Tom watched his son work alongside Vernon's daughter and felt something like hope. Maybe Daniel could learn what Tom was learning. That success was not measured in money or comfort. That some things were worth more than safety. That standing for something mattered more than standing for nothing. Rebecca called that evening. Tom, I have been watching the news, she said. Her voice was thick with emotion. I am so proud of you. I am sorry I did not understand sooner. I am sorry I suggested assisted living and tried to make you give up. You found something worth fighting for. Mom would be so proud. Tom felt tears in his eyes. Thank you, honey. I cannot come to Montana, Rebecca said. I have surgeries scheduled, patients who need me. But I am telling everyone here what you are doing. I am sharing Marcus's articles. I am making sure Boston knows what is happening in Montana. You are not alone in this, Dad. After the call, Tom sat on his porch and looked out at the encampment. Fires burning in barrels. Veterans swapping stories around trucks. Families sharing meals. This community that had formed around a principle, around the simple idea that some things should not be for sale. Grace sat beside him. How are you holding up? Tired, Tom admitted, scared, but also more alive than I have been in years. My father saw that in you. Grace looked out at the same scene Tom was watching. When he came back from meeting you that first time, he said you reminded him of your grandfather. Stubborn and principled, and exactly the kind of person this land needed. I wish he was here to see this. He is, Grace said, in everyone who showed up to stand with you, in every person who refused to let them win. Vernon spent his whole life being the quiet neighbor who helped when he could. Now people are honoring that by being loud, by refusing to be quiet when it matters. The court hearing was scheduled for the following Monday. Grace, Daniel, and a team of lawyers they had assembled worked around the clock preparing their case. They had evidence of the conspiracy, documentation of the murders, expert testimony about the rare earth deposits, character witnesses who would speak to Tom's competence and Nathaniel's legacy. Sentinel had its own team, expensive lawyers from Washington, government officials prepared to testify about national security needs, mineral experts ready to explain the strategic importance of the deposits. The legal battle would be fierce. But Grace had one advantage Sentinel could not match: public opinion. The story had captured something in the American imagination: a veteran standing against corporate power, a community rallying to protect one of their own, ordinary people refusing to be bullied by money and connections. It was a narrative that resonated across political lines, across demographics, across the usual divisions. The night before the hearing, Tom could not sleep. He walked his property in the darkness, Bess following him like a patient shadow. He checked on the cattle, all healthy, all calm. He walked the fence lines his grandfather had built and he had repaired. He stood on the ridge where Elizabeth was buried and looked out at the mountains. Somewhere out there, Sentinel was planning. Martin Chase and his lawyers were preparing arguments. Federal officials were calculating political costs. The machinery of power was turning, grinding toward a conclusion that would determine whether Tom kept his land or lost everything. But standing on that ridge in the cold November night, Tom realized something. He had already won. Not the legal battle, not the fight for the land, but something more important. He had found what Helen had told him to find. He had become the man his grandfather wanted him to be. He had stood for something when everyone told him to yield. Win or lose the land, that could never be taken from him. The hearing started at 9 in the morning in the federal courthouse in Billings. The courtroom was packed beyond capacity, journalists filling the press section, supporters crowding the public gallery. Security was tight, metal detectors at every entrance, marshals watching the crowd with alert eyes. People who could not fit inside stood in the hallway and the lobby, on the courthouse steps. The overflow watched on phones streaming live coverage from inside the courtroom. Tom sat at the plaintiff's table with Grace and Daniel. Across the aisle sat Sentinel's legal team, 5 lawyers in expensive suits with matching briefcases, Martin Chase beside them looking calm and confident. Behind Tom, he could feel the presence of everyone who had come. Ray Martinez, Dutch Coleman, Bate Hutchins, Marcus Webb with his recorder running. The weight of their faith in him pressed down like a physical thing. The judge was Patricia Morrison, a woman in her 60s with steel gray hair and reading glasses on a chain around her neck. She had a reputation for fairness, but also for ruling in favor of government interests when national security was invoked. Grace had been honest about their chances. 50-50 at best, maybe worse. Judge Morrison looked out at the packed courtroom with an expression that suggested she understood the significance of what was happening here. The proceedings started with opening arguments. Sentinel's lead lawyer was a man named Roger Hastings, partner at a Washington firm that specialized in government contracts and eminent domain. He spoke with practiced confidence, laying out the case as if it were simple and obvious. Your Honor, this is a straightforward matter of national security. The property in question contains rare earth mineral deposits essential to United States defense capabilities. These minerals are currently controlled by foreign powers who could cut off access at any time, crippling our military readiness. The Defense Production Act authorizes the government to secure strategic materials when national interest requires it. We have followed all proper procedures. We are offering fair market compensation. This is not a taking. This is a purchase that Mr. Garrett is refusing to make voluntarily, forcing the government to exercise its lawful authority. Hastings spoke for 20 minutes, citing precedents, explaining the legal framework, making it sound reasonable and necessary. When he finished, Judge Morrison looked to Grace. Ms. Harper, your opening argument. Grace stood. She was wearing a dark suit that made her look older, more authoritative. Her voice when she spoke was steady but carried an edge that cut through the legal formality. Your Honor, Sentinel Defense Industries wants this court to believe we are here to discuss eminent domain. We are not. We are here to discuss corporate theft disguised as government action. To understand what is really happening, we need to look at 70 years of history. Grace walked to a display board her team had set up. On it were photographs. Jim Foster, the other 3 geologists who had died in the 60s and 70s, Vernon Pike in his hospital bed, death certificates, toxicology reports, documents with Martin Chase's signature spanning decades. In 1954, she said, a geologist named James Foster discovered rare earth deposits on the property then owned by Nathaniel Garrett, Tom's grandfather. Foster documented his findings thoroughly. He also documented something else: government pressure to report the discovery so the land could be seized. Foster and Nathaniel made a choice. They buried the evidence to protect the land. Over the next 7 decades, 4 geologists who knew about the deposits died in accidents. Car crashes, falls, drownings, all investigated by local law enforcement with connections to the mining companies that wanted access to the deposits. Grace presented the toxicology matches between Foster's 1978 death and Vernon's recent poisoning. Identical arsenic compounds, identical dosage patterns, identical method of delivery spanning 47 years. Someone has been systematically eliminating people who threaten to expose this conspiracy. And that someone, Grace turned to point at Martin Chase, has been involved since the beginning. Martin Chase's signature appears on documents from 1978 authorizing payments to the sheriff who covered up Jim Foster's murder. Martin Chase's signature appears on the eminent domain petition filed days after Vernon Pike was poisoned. This is not the government exercising lawful authority. This is a corporation that has killed to keep a secret, and now wants a federal court to legitimize their crimes. The courtroom was absolutely silent. Judge Morrison's expression had shifted from neutral to deeply serious. She looked at the evidence boards, at the documents Grace had submitted, at Martin Chase sitting impassive across the aisle. "Mr. Hastings," Judge Morrison said, "how do you respond to these allegations?" Hastings stood smoothly. "Your Honor, these are inflammatory accusations without supporting evidence. The deaths Ms. Harper references occurred over 70 years across multiple jurisdictions. There is no credible evidence linking them. As for the eminent domain petition, it is a standard legal process that Sentinel has every right to pursue. The timing is coincidental, not conspiratorial." Grace immediately responded, "Your Honor, we have toxicology reports showing identical poisoning methods. We have financial records showing payments from Montana Mining Corporation, a Sentinel predecessor, to law enforcement officials involved in death investigations. We have classified documents from 1952 showing a coordinated effort to locate and secure rare earth deposits through any means necessary. This is not coincidence. This is pattern." Judge Morrison held up her hand. "I will review all evidence submitted. But Ms. Harper, you understand that even if your allegations are true, they do not necessarily invalidate the eminent domain petition. If the deposits exist and are strategically significant, the government has authority to secure them regardless of past corporate misconduct." "With respect, Your Honor," Grace said, "the government has no petition before you. Sentinel Defense Industries has a petition, a private corporation seeking to use government authority for private gain. The Defense Production Act does not authorize private corporations to seize property. It authorizes the government to do so. Sentinel is not the government." Hastings stood again. "Sentinel operates under contract with the Department of Defense. We are acting as an authorized agent of federal authority." "Then where," Grace asked, "is the Department of Defense? Where is any federal official testifying to national security need? Where is the formal government review required before invoking eminent domain? Sentinel has filed paperwork and claims authority, but they have provided no evidence that the government has actually authorized this action beyond allowing them to file a petition." Judge Morrison looked at Hastings. "That is a fair question, Counselor. Do you have federal officials prepared to testify? Hastings hesitated. Your Honor, given the classified nature of national security materials, federal testimony was anticipated for closed proceedings. There will be no closed proceedings in this matter, Judge Morrison said sharply. If you are claiming national security authority, you will provide public evidence, or I will assume such authority does not exist. This court will not rubber stamp a corporate land grab based on classification claims. The tide had shifted. Tom could feel it in the courtroom, in the way journalists leaned forward, in the way Sentinel's lawyers exchanged worried glances. Judge Morrison was not accepting their framework. She was questioning the fundamental basis of their petition. The hearing continued through the afternoon. Witnesses were called. Marcus Webb testified about his investigation, about the pattern of deaths, about the evidence he had uncovered. Grace presented expert testimony from geologists who confirmed the deposits existed but questioned whether they constituted the emergency Sentinel claimed. Daniel, working with Grace's team, systematically dismantled Sentinel's procedural arguments, showing gaps in their filings, missing authorizations, questionable legal theories. Martin Chase was called to testify. He answered questions with practiced evasion, claiming not to remember details about events from 1978, refusing to comment on ongoing investigations, deflecting responsibility to subordinates and predecessors. But under Grace's cross-examination, cracks appeared. She walked him through documents with his signature, timelines that showed his involvement, connections between events he claimed to know nothing about. Mr. Chase, Grace said, holding up two documents side by side. This is a payment authorization you signed in 1978 to Sheriff Wade Reeves. This is an eminent domain petition you signed 3 weeks ago. Both involve the same property. Both were signed immediately after someone died who could have exposed the deposits. Are we really supposed to believe these are coincidences? Chase's lawyer objected. Speculation, inflammatory questioning. But Judge Morrison overruled. The witness will answer. Chase looked at the documents, looked at Grace, looked at the packed courtroom and the cameras. I invoke my Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination. The courtroom erupted. Judge Morrison gavelled for order, but the damage was done. A senior corporate executive refusing to testify about his own company's petition because answering might incriminate him. The optics were devastating. Judge Morrison called a recess. The courtroom emptied into the hallway where reporters mobbed lawyers and supporters celebrated quietly. Tom stood with Grace and Daniel, too overwhelmed to speak. We hurt them, Daniel said. Chase taking the fifth, that is huge. It is not over, Grace cautioned, but we have momentum. They reconvened 90 minutes later. Judge Morrison looked tired but determined. She read from notes she had made during the recess, her voice formal and careful. This court has reviewed the evidence and testimony presented today. The allegations of criminal conspiracy are serious and, if true, would invalidate any claims Sentinel Defense Industries might make to this property. However, this is not a criminal court. I cannot make definitive findings on criminal matters beyond my jurisdiction. Tom's heart sank. She was going to grant the petition despite everything. That said, Judge Morrison continued, I also cannot ignore credible evidence of systematic fraud and violence connected to this petition. The procedural irregularities in Sentinel's filings are significant. The absence of direct federal authorization is concerning, and the circumstances surrounding recent events raise questions that must be answered before any eminent domain action proceeds. The judge listened without expression, called a recess, reconvened 2 hours later. Her decision was careful, balanced, unexpected. She denied Sentinel's immediate petition for eminent domain, ordered a full investigation into the allegations of criminal conspiracy, appointed a special master to review all evidence, halted all actions against Tom's property pending investigation outcomes. It was not a final victory. The special master process could take years. The criminal investigation might lead nowhere. Sentinel could appeal, could find other legal avenues, but it was a reprieve. Time, space to breathe and fight another day. The courtroom erupted in applause. The judge gavelled for order but allowed it to continue for a moment. Tom sat stunned, barely able to process what had happened. They had not lost. They had bought time, maybe enough time for the truth to matter. Outside the courthouse, cameras were everywhere. Grace gave a statement, professional and composed. Daniel stood beside her, his presence a statement of family unity. Tom said nothing, just stood with his children and let their strength carry the moment. The news that night was jubilant. Legal victory for Montana rancher. Investigation ordered into defense contractor conspiracy. Eminent domain denied. The hashtag trends shifted. Not just stand with Brennan anymore. Now it was justice for Vernon. Investigate Sentinel. Protect family land. Back at Thunder Ridge that evening, the celebration was quiet. People knew this was not over, but they also knew they had won something important. They had forced power to pause, to justify itself, to face scrutiny. That was more than most people accomplished when they stood against corporations and government combined. Tom found himself alone on his porch as the sun set. Everyone else was around fires, sharing food, telling stories. He sat in his grandfather's chair and looked out at the land Nathaniel had protected for 50 years. The land Tom had fought for. The land that might still be taken, but not today. Not without a fight that made the taking costly. Grace joined him, brought 2 beers, handed him one. They drank in silence for a while. "What happens next?" Tom asked. "We keep fighting," Grace said. "The special master process, the criminal investigation, the appeals Sentinel will file. It will take years, but we have time now, and we have momentum. And if we lose in the end, then we lose knowing we did everything possible." Grace looked at him. "My father died protecting this. Your grandfather spent his life protecting it. You have brought it into the light, made people care, forced accountability. That matters, Tom. Win or lose, that matters." Tom thought about all the people who had shown up to stand with him. Veterans who had driven across the country. Ranchers who had brought their families. Lawyers who had worked for free. Journalists who had told the truth. A community that had formed around a principle bigger than any individual. "We changed something," Tom said. "I do not know what exactly, but we changed something." "Yes," Grace agreed, "we did." They sat and watched the stars emerge over Thunder Ridge. Somewhere out there, Martin Chase was regrouping. Sentinel was planning their next move. The fight would continue tomorrow and the day after and possibly for years. But tonight, on this porch, with this land still his, Tom Garrett felt something he had not felt since Helen died. He felt like he had done something that mattered, something she would have been proud of, something that honored the grandfather he never knew and the friend who had died standing with him. The land beneath Thunder Ridge held its secrets still, but the truth was coming to light, and Tom would be here to see it through, however long it took, whatever the cost. Some battles were worth fighting not because you would win, but because fighting them made you who you were supposed to be. Tom had found who he was supposed to be. And he was just getting started. 6 months after the court hearing, winter gave way to a hesitant spring, snow melting in patches across the north pasture, the creek running high with runoff. Tom watched the land wake from its frozen sleep and felt something similar happening inside himself. The grief that had defined him for so long was still there, would always be there, but it no longer consumed everything else. Helen's memory had found its proper place. A part of him, not the whole of him. The federal investigation moved with government speed, which was to say slowly but thoroughly. Special prosecutors assigned to the case methodically worked through 70 years of evidence. They interviewed witnesses, reviewed documents, traced financial records through decades of shell companies and buried payments. Grace coordinated with them, providing the evidence she and Tom had compiled, guiding them through the conspiracy's tangled history. The indictments came down in early April. 8 Sentinel Defense Industries executives charged with conspiracy to commit murder, obstruction of justice, fraud, and violations of federal racketeering statutes. Martin Chase was arrested at his home in Virginia, led out in handcuffs while cameras recorded every moment. The footage played on every news channel. This powerful man who had orchestrated deaths and cover-ups for decades finally facing consequences. Sheriff Carl Reeves was charged as an accessory after the fact for his role in covering up Vernon's poisoning. His resignation was accepted before the charges were officially filed. The pattern his father had started continued through him, but it ended there. The new sheriff was a woman named Elena Rodriguez, former military police, who had no connection to the old networks of power and corruption. The trials would take years. Defense lawyers were already filing motions, challenging evidence, seeking delays. But the indictments themselves mattered. They were official acknowledgement that the conspiracy was real, that people had died, that power had been abused. Vernon's death was no longer dismissed as accidental. Jim Foster's car crash was reopened as a homicide. The other geologists who had died in the 60s and 70s were being investigated with fresh eyes and modern forensics. Justice was slow, but it was coming. The question of the land itself took longer to resolve. The special master appointed by Judge Morrison spent 3 months reviewing every aspect of the case. The mineral deposits, their strategic value, the history of the property, the legal frameworks for eminent domain, the criminal conspiracy that had surrounded it all. His report, when it finally came, was careful and balanced. Yes, the deposits existed and had significant strategic value. Yes, the government had legitimate interest in securing domestic sources of rare earth minerals. But no, that interest did not justify ignoring criminal conspiracy or bypassing proper legal process. The special master recommended that any eminent domain action be suspended pending criminal trial outcomes. He further recommended that, if the government wished to pursue access to the minerals, it do so through negotiation with the property owner rather than forced seizure. Tom received 3 formal offers in the month after the special master's report. The first came from the Department of Interior, a letter on official letterhead offering to purchase the mineral rights for $50 million. Fair market value based on geological surveys and comparable sales. The government would own the minerals, Tom would retain surface rights to the land, and extraction would be managed through existing federal mining programs. Tom read the letter twice, then set it aside. $50 million, more money than he could imagine, enough to set up his children and grandchildren for life. Enough to never worry about anything material again, but also a surrender. The government taking what Nathaniel had protected, what Vernon had died defending, just with a check instead of force. The second offer came from a consortium of mining companies, led by a firm that had no connection to Sentinel. $60 million for complete property purchase. They would mine the deposits, reclaim the land afterward, provide jobs to the local community. Professional, reasonable, and completely counter to everything Tom had fought for. The third offer was different. It came from a company called Ethical Earth Resources, a smaller operation that specialized in sustainable rare earth extraction. Their letter was longer, more detailed. They proposed a partnership. Tom would retain ownership of the land. They would lease mining rights for a percentage of profits, guaranteed minimum payments, strict environmental protections written into the contract, local hiring requirements, and Tom's approval required for all major operational decisions. They sent a representative to meet with Tom in person. Her name was Sarah Chen, the same documentary filmmaker who had covered the standoff, now working with the mining company as an environmental consultant. She sat at Tom's kitchen table with maps and plans and spoke about new extraction techniques that minimized surface disruption, about water protection protocols, about restoration requirements. "This is not about taking your land," Sarah said. "This is about working with it. The minerals are valuable. They should be used. But they should be used responsibly, with respect for the people and the place they come from." Tom asked the question that mattered most. What happens when the mining is done? "We reclaim everything," Sarah said. "Fill the excavations, restore topography, replant native species. In 20 years, you would not know we had been here except for the access roads, and those can be removed too if you want. This land would still be yours, still be your family's." Tom consulted with Grace and Daniel. They reviewed the contracts, checked the company's history, verified their environmental record. Ethical Earth Resources was legitimate, small but growing. They had successfully completed 3 rare earth projects using the methods they proposed, all on time and under budget, all with minimal environmental impact. "It is a good offer," Grace said. "Maybe the best you will get. You keep the land, you get income that can support conservation efforts, and the minerals get extracted in a way that does not destroy everything." Daniel agreed. "I have reviewed every clause. They have real accountability measures. If they violate environmental protocols, you can terminate the lease. You maintain control." Tom thought about it for a week, walked his property from boundary to boundary, touching fence posts Nathaniel had set, standing on the ridge where Elizabeth was buried, looking out at mountains that had witnessed everything. He thought about what his grandfather would want. Not the minerals buried forever, but the land protected, the principle honored. He signed the contract with Ethical Earth Resources. The announcement brought mixed reactions. Some environmental groups criticized any mining. Some supporters felt he had compromised too much, but most people understood. Tom had found a middle path, not surrender, not absolute refusal, but partnership that respected both the value of the minerals and the sanctity of the land. The first payment came through in May, $5 million. Tom stared at the number on the bank statement and could not quite process it. He had spent his whole life working for hourly wages, watching every dollar. Now he had more money than he knew what to do with. Grace helped him establish the Vernon Harper Memorial Fund. It would provide financial assistance to small ranchers facing pressure from corporations or banks. Legal support, operating loans, whatever was needed to help people keep their land. The fund would be administered by a board that included Grace, Dutch Coleman, and Bate Hutchins, people who understood what it meant to fight for your ground. Tom endowed it with $2 million. Vernon had died protecting this land. Now his death would help protect others. He created the Nathaniel Garrett Foundation with another $1 million. Its mission was to support whistleblowers, people who exposed corporate or government corruption at personal cost, legal defense funds, financial assistance, protection for those who chose truth over safety. Marcus Webb joined the board, bringing his networks of investigative journalists and legal advocates. The rest of the money Tom set aside, not for himself, for the future, for challenges he could not yet imagine, for the ongoing fight to protect what mattered. Rebecca came to visit in June. She took 2 weeks off from her surgical practice, the first extended vacation she had taken in years. She arrived with her daughter Emma, 13 years old and curious about everything, asking questions before she was fully out of the car. They stayed in the ranch house, sleeping in the small bedroom where Tom's grandfather had slept, cooking meals together on the old stove that Rebecca remembered from childhood visits she had barely acknowledged before, learning the rhythms of the land that had seemed foreign and were now becoming familiar. Tom taught Emma to ride Bess, the old mare patient with the girl's uncertainty. Emma was nervous at first, gripping the saddle horn too tight, her body stiff with fear of falling. But Bess seemed to understand. She moved slowly, carefully, waiting for the girl to relax. By the third day, Emma was riding with confidence, asking to go farther, stay out longer. Tom showed her how to check the cattle, how to look for signs of illness or injury, how to count them morning and evening to make sure none had wandered or been taken by predators. Emma took notes in a spiral notebook, drawing pictures of the cattle with labels for their markings. She named them all, something Tom had never done. The big one with the white face became Snowball. The one with the crooked horn was Lefty. Emma gave them personalities in her descriptions. Snowball is the leader. Lefty is shy but friendly. They walked the property together, Tom pointing out landmarks. The creek where he had found the second burial site, the ridge where Nathaniel and Elizabeth were buried, the north pasture where the mining operation extracted minerals that would power technologies Emma used every day without thinking about where the materials came from. Emma asked questions Tom had never considered. What happens to the land after the mining is done? How long will the minerals last? What if they run out? Tom answered as honestly as he could, admitting when he did not know, explaining the balance between use and protection that he was still learning himself. One evening, sitting on the porch while Rebecca cooked dinner inside, Emma asked the question that mattered most. Why did you fight them, Grandpa? You could have just taken the money and been rich. Why did you stay? Tom thought about how to explain it to someone who had grown up with every material comfort, who had never had to fight for anything because her parents had made sure she never needed to. Because some things matter more than money, he said. Your great-great-grandfather protected this land his whole life. Your mother's friend Vernon died protecting it. If I had just sold it to the highest bidder, what would their sacrifices have meant? But you could have helped more people with $50 million than you can with a ranch. Maybe, Tom said, but I can teach you things with this ranch I could never teach you with money. How to work hard, how to stand for something, how to care for land that will be here long after we are gone. Those are lessons worth more than any amount of money. Emma thought about this, her face serious in the evening light. I think I understand, she said. It is like Mom being a surgeon. She could make more money doing other kinds of medicine, but she does what she does because it matters. Exactly, Tom said. Your mother stands for something. I am standing for something too. It looks different, but it comes from the same place. Rebecca joined them on the porch, 3 plates of food balanced in her hands. She had been listening from inside. That is the best explanation I have heard, she said to Tom. And Emma, your grandfather is right. Some things matter more than money. I am proud he taught you that. They ate dinner watching the sunset, talking about school and work and the differences between Boston and Montana. Emma wanted to know if she could come back next summer, maybe stay longer, maybe even the whole summer if her parents would let her. Of course, Tom said. This is your land too, your inheritance, you should know it. After Emma went to bed, Rebecca and Tom sat on the porch in the darkness, listening to the night sounds Tom had learned to identify over the past year. Owls, coyotes distant on the ridge, the wind moving through grass. Thank you for this, Rebecca said, for giving Emma something I never knew I was missing. Connection to land, to family, to history that matters. You gave her that by bringing her here, Tom said, by being willing to let her see this life. "I was so wrong about you," Rebecca said, her voice thick with emotion. "When Mom died and you came here, I thought you were running away. I thought you were having some kind of breakdown. I wanted you in assisted living where you would be safe and managed. I did not see that you were actually finding yourself." "I did not see it either at first," Tom admitted. "I came here because I had nowhere else to go. I stayed because I found a reason to stay. That is all any of us can do. Keep looking until we find the thing worth staying for." "Mom knew," Rebecca said. "She always knew you had more in you than the factory and the suburbs. She just died before she could see you become it." "She sees it," Tom said. "Wherever she is, she knows." Daniel moved to Montana permanently in July. He joined Grace's law practice, which had grown from a one-person operation to a firm of 5 lawyers, all working on land rights and environmental cases. The publicity from Tom's case had brought in clients from across the state, ranchers and farmers and small business owners fighting corporate overreach. Daniel rented a house in Billings but spent weekends at the ranch, learning from Tom the same way Tom had learned from Vernon: how to mend fence, how to read cattle, how to work the land with respect rather than force. Daniel's hands, soft from years of pushing paper, developed calluses. His expensive clothes gave way to work jeans and boots. He started sleeping better, eating better, laughing more easily. One Saturday, working together to replace rotted boards on the barn, Daniel said, "I wasted a lot of years chasing the wrong things. Money, prestige, approval from people whose opinions did not matter. I thought that was success." "What do you think success is now?" Tom asked. "This," Daniel said, gesturing at the barn, the land, the mountains beyond. "Doing work that matters, standing for something. Being someone my kids can be proud of." "Your kids are already proud of you," Tom said, "but I am proud of who you are becoming." Daniel's children visited in August. His son Marcus, 11, and his daughter Lily, 9. They arrived skeptical city kids who thought Montana was boring, who missed their phones and their friends. But the land worked its magic. Marcus learned to fish in the creek and came back with stories about the size of the trout that got away. Lily helped Tom in the garden and discovered she loved watching things grow. On their last day, Marcus asked if they could come back next summer. Tom said yes, absolutely. Lily asked if they could stay longer next time. Tom said as long as they wanted. After they left, Daniel called to thank him. "You gave them something I could not," Daniel said. "Connection to land, to history, to something real." "You gave them that," Tom said, "by bringing them here, by being willing to change." The mining operation began in September. Ethical Earth Resources set up their base camp on the north section of the property, far from the house and the areas Tom used for ranching. They brought in equipment, hired local workers, started the careful process of accessing the deposits with minimal surface disruption. Sarah Chen oversaw the environmental monitoring personally. She walked the property with Tom weekly, showing him water quality reports, soil samples, wildlife impact studies. Everything was documented, everything was transparent. When they hit a pocket of deposit that would have required expanding the excavation beyond agreed boundaries, they stopped and renegotiated the approach rather than just proceeding. "This is what partnership looks like," Sarah said. "You trust us to do good work. We prove that trust is deserved." The local community benefited immediately. 40 jobs created, most filled by people from Elkhorn and surrounding towns. Good paying work with benefits and safety protocols. The town started to change. New businesses opened. Young families moved in. The school enrollment grew. Bate Hutchins opened the cafe she had dreamed about, using a loan from the Vernon Harper Memorial Fund. She called it the Ridge, served coffee and homemade food, became the gathering place where ranchers and miners and locals mixed and talked. Tom stopped in most mornings when he came to town, sitting at the counter, drinking coffee that Bate made just the way he liked it, listening to conversations about cattle prices and shift schedules and Friday night football games. "You did this," Bates said to him one morning. "All of this. The jobs, the growth, the hope." "We did this," Tom corrected. "Everyone who stood together. Everyone who refused to let power win." Marcus Webb won a Pulitzer Prize for his investigative reporting on the Thunder Ridge conspiracy. He accepted the award wearing a Montana Stockgrowers Association cap and dedicated it to Vernon Pike and Jim Foster and all the people who had died protecting truth. The prize brought more attention, more opportunities. Major papers tried to recruit him. National news programs wanted him as a contributor. He turned them all down and stayed in Montana, kept working local stories, kept fighting corporate power with words instead of weapons. The trial of Martin Chase and the other Sentinel executives began in November. It was held in federal court in Billings, Judge Morrison presiding. The prosecution had spent months building an airtight case: financial records, communications, witness testimony, forensic evidence. The toxicology matches between victims spanning decades. Tom attended every day of the trial, sitting in the public gallery with Grace and Daniel and survivors of other victims. He watched Martin Chase sit impassive at the defense table, watched the evidence pile up against him, watched the jury's expressions shift from skepticism to understanding to disgust. The trial lasted 6 weeks. The jury deliberated for 2 days. The verdict came back guilty on all counts. Martin Chase showed no emotion when it was read, but his hands gripped the table edge so hard his knuckles went white. Sentencing would come later, but the conviction itself was victory enough. A powerful man held accountable, a conspiracy exposed, justice, imperfect and delayed but real. Grace cried when the verdict was read. Tom put his arm around her shoulders and felt her shake with emotion she had been holding back for months. "Vernon would have wanted to be here to see this," Grace said through tears. "He sees it," Tom said. "Wherever he is, he knows." Winter returned to Thunder Ridge, and with it a kind of peace Tom had not known was possible. The first snow fell in early December, covering the land in white that made everything clean and new. Tom stood on his porch in the cold morning air, coffee steaming in his hands, looking out at mountains that had witnessed so much and remained unchanged. The cattle were healthy. The mining operation was proceeding on schedule with no environmental violations. The legal battles were mostly resolved. His children were part of his life again. His grandchildren knew him now, called him Grandpa Tom with affection instead of awkward formality. He thought about Helen often, wished she could see what he had become, what he had built, but in quiet moments he felt her presence. Not literally. He was not that kind of believer, but in the sense that who he was now honored who she had wanted him to be. Find something, she had said. He had found more than something. He had found himself. On a clear Saturday in mid-December, Tom rode Bess up to the ridge where Nathaniel and Elizabeth were buried. The graves were properly marked now, with headstones Tom had commissioned from a craftsman in Sheridan. Simple granite with names and dates and a few words that captured who they had been. Nathaniel Garrett, 1933 to 2024, he stood his ground. Elizabeth Garrett, 1935 to 1959, she chose love over ease. Tom had added a third stone beside theirs. Vernon Pike, 1957 to 2025, he helped his neighbors. Tom dismounted and stood before the graves. The snow was ankle deep, the wind cold but not bitter. He could see for miles. The ranch house below, the mining operation in the distance, the mountains rising in every direction. Land that had been worth fighting for, land that would be here long after he was gone. "I did what you asked," Tom said to the stones, to the memories they represented. "I protected what you left me. Not perfectly, not the way you might have wanted, but the best way I knew how. The wind moved through the pines, the only sound in the vast quiet. Tom stood with the dead and the living, with the past and the future, and felt the weight of both. I am going to keep going, he said. Keep fighting for what matters. Keep teaching my grandchildren about why this land is worth protecting. Keep standing with people who need someone to stand with them. That is the legacy you left. Not the minerals, not the money. The example of standing your ground when everyone says to yield. Tom placed flowers on each grave, artificial ones that would last through the winter. Then he remounted Bess and rode back down to the ranch, the afternoon sun slanting through the clouds, casting long shadows across the snow. Life on Thunder Ridge settled into new rhythms. The work remained constant. Cattle needed tending regardless of weather or season. Fences needed mending. Equipment needed maintenance. But Tom was not alone in the work anymore. Daniel came most weekends. Local teenagers worked part-time learning ranching from someone willing to teach. The land that had been Nathaniel's lonely kingdom became a gathering place, a teaching place, a symbol of what ordinary people could protect when they stood together. Grace became a regular presence, staying in the guest room Tom had finally finished in the barn loft. She was writing a book about the case, about Vernon and Nathaniel, and the 70-year fight to protect Thunder Ridge. Not for money or fame, for the record. So people would know what it cost to stand against power. So the story would not be forgotten or sanitized or reduced to headlines. Sometimes in the evenings, Tom and Grace would sit on the porch with coffee or beer, talking about the future, about where the fight went next, about other ranchers facing pressure, about corporate tactics and legal strategies and how to build coalitions that could actually win. You should run for office, Grace said one night. State legislature, Congress. You have name recognition now. People trust you. I am not a politician, Tom said. Neither were the best ones, Grace countered. They were just people who saw something wrong and decided to fix it. That is you. Tom thought about it. The idea was terrifying and appealing in equal measure. He had never imagined himself in public office. But he had never imagined himself as a rancher either, or an environmental advocate, or someone who could stand down a corporation with billions of dollars. Maybe Grace was right. Maybe there was more he could do. I will think about it, he said. Good, Grace said, because we need people like you making decisions, people who actually stand for something. The foundation work consumed more time than Tom had anticipated. Applications for assistance came from across Montana and beyond. Ranchers fighting banks, farmers resisting corporate buyouts, whistleblowers facing retaliation. Each case required review, investigation, resource allocation. Tom hired staff to manage the day-to-day operations, but he insisted on reviewing every major decision personally. This was Vernon's legacy. Nathaniel's fight continued. He would not delegate it away. The first major case, the Vernon Harper Memorial Fund took on, involved a family in eastern Montana. The Johnsons had ranched the same land for 4 generations, 2,400 acres of grassland along the Yellowstone River. A development company wanted to buy them out, build a resort and golf course. The Johnsons refused. Then the bank that held their equipment loan suddenly called it due, 3 years early, claiming breach of terms the family had never violated. The bank's new regional manager had ties to the development company. Grace and Daniel flew out to meet with the Johnsons, reviewed their loan documents, found the irregularities, threatened legal action. The bank backed down. The equipment loan was restructured with better terms than before. The development company found another location. The Johnsons kept their land. When they tried to thank Tom, he told them what Vernon would have said. We are neighbors. This is what neighbors do. The Nathaniel Garrett Foundation supported 12 whistleblowers in its first year, engineers who had reported safety violations and been fired, accountants who had exposed fraud and faced retaliation, government employees who had documented corruption and been transferred to dead-end positions. The foundation provided legal representation, financial support to replace lost income, protection when threats emerged. One case involved a quality inspector at a meatpacking plant who had reported contamination that could have made thousands of people sick. The company fired him, blacklisted him in the industry, sued him for defamation. The foundation fought back, hired the best lawyers, covered his living expenses for 18 months while the case worked through court, won a settlement that included his job back pay, and policy changes at the company. The inspector called Tom personally to say thank you. "You saved my life," he said, "not just my career, my life. I was thinking about giving up. You gave me a reason to keep fighting." "That is what your grandfather did for me," Tom said. "I am just passing it forward." Marcus Webb's Pulitzer Prize brought attention to the foundation's work. Donors started contributing, not just wealthy individuals looking for tax deductions, but ordinary people sending $50 or $100 because they believed in what Tom and Grace had built. The foundation's endowment grew beyond what Tom had initially funded. It became sustainable, self-perpetuating, capable of helping people long after Tom was gone. Grace hired a team of lawyers and investigators, set up regional offices, developed systems for vetting applications and deploying resources efficiently. She was building something that would outlast them both, a permanent structure dedicated to the principle that ordinary people deserved protection when they stood against power. "You are building an empire," Tom said to her one evening, watching her work through another stack of case files. "I am building armor," Grace corrected, "for people who have none. That is what my father would have wanted. That is what your grandfather spent his life doing alone. Now we do it together, with resources and reach he never had." Spring came again. The second spring since Tom had arrived at Thunder Ridge with nothing but grief and a truck full of belongings. He planted the garden using Nathaniel's journal and his own growing experience. The seeds went into soil that was richer now, better tended. Tom had learned what worked in this climate, this elevation, this rocky ground that had seemed impossible when he first arrived. The turnips and potatoes came up strong. The wheat established well. Tom walked the rows in the early morning, checking growth, pulling weeds, feeling the satisfaction of creation that only came from working soil. This was what Nathaniel had done for 50 years, what Elizabeth had loved about this place. The simple act of coaxing life from difficult earth. Rebecca visited again in April, bringing Emma and staying a full month. Emma had changed over the winter, grown taller, more confident. She worked alongside Tom in the garden, no longer needing constant instruction. She had read Grace's manuscript about the case and had questions. "Were you scared?" Emma asked one afternoon while they were planting bean rows. "Every day," Tom said honestly, "but being scared does not mean you stop. It means you are doing something that matters." "What if you had lost?" "Then I would have lost standing up. That would have been better than winning by giving up." Emma thought about this. "I want to be like you when I grow up." Tom smiled. "Be better than me. Be someone who does not wait until 62 to stand for something. Start now." Daniel brought his family for Easter. They all stayed at the ranch, the house full of noise and life and laughter Tom had not known he was missing. They cooked meals together, the whole family working in the small kitchen, bumping into each other, talking and joking. They hiked up to the ridge and stood at Nathaniel's grave while Tom told stories about the grandfather none of them had known. Marcus asked if the land would stay in the family after Tom was gone. Tom said yes, if that was what they wanted, But more important than ownership was stewardship, taking care of the land, standing for what it represented. That was the real inheritance. The mining operation reached full production in May. The first shipment of processed rare earth minerals left the facility bound for manufacturers across the country. American-made materials for American industry. Strategic independence from foreign suppliers. Exactly what the government had claimed to want, achieved through partnership instead of force. Sarah Chen showed Tom the quarterly report, profits above projections, environmental metrics all within acceptable ranges, zero safety incidents, community relations excellent. They had proven the model worked. Ethical extraction was possible. Profit and principle could coexist. "You are going to be very wealthy from this," Sarah said. Tom looked at the numbers. More money flowing in every quarter than he had earned in years at the factory. It still did not feel real. What am I supposed to do with it? "Whatever matters to you," Sarah said. "That is the gift of financial security. You get to choose what to fight for instead of just fighting to survive." Tom expanded the foundations. More staff, more resources, more cases. They started winning. Small ranchers keeping their land, whistleblowers protected from retaliation, corporate accountability forced through legal pressure and public exposure. The model Tom and Grace had developed at Thunder Ridge spread. Other communities started organizing. Other people started standing their ground. Summer brought visitors, people who had heard the story and wanted to see the place for themselves. Tom gave tour, showing them the ridge, the garden, the mining operation that proved sustainable extraction was possible. He told Nathaniel's story and Vernon's story and his own story, not for ego, for example, for proof that ordinary people could make a difference. Some of the visitors were journalists, still fascinated by the case. Some were students, writing papers about corporate power and environmental justice. Some were just people who needed to know that fighting back was possible. Tom welcomed them all, gave them time and truth and coffee. Let them see that he was just a man, not a hero. That what he had done, they could do too. On the anniversary of Vernon's death, Tom held a memorial service on the ridge. Grace was there, along with Vernon's extended family. Dutch Coleman and the veterans who had stood watch. Bate Hutchins and people from town. Marcus Webb documenting it all. They told stories about Vernon, about his quiet kindness and his stubborn integrity. They planted an oak tree beside his grave, a living monument that would grow long after they were all gone. Tom spoke briefly. "Vernon was my friend," he said, "my teacher, my example of what it meant to live with principle. He died protecting this land and everything it represents. The best way to honor him is to keep fighting the fights he would have fought, to help the people he would have helped, to stand the way he taught us to stand." The oak tree was small now, barely 3 feet tall, but it would grow. In 50 years, it would shade this ridge the way the pines did. In 100 years, it would still be here, a living reminder of a man who had mattered. Tom turned 63 in August. A quiet birthday, just him and Grace and Daniel. They grilled steaks on the porch, drank beer, watched the sun set over the mountains. No party, no fuss. Just acknowledgement that another year had passed, another year survived and maybe even thrived. Rebecca sent a card. Emma drew a picture of the ranch with Tom and Bess in front of the house. Daniel's kids made a video message singing happy birthday off key and laughing. Simple gestures that meant everything. The harvest came in September. Tom's best yet. Vegetables that would fill the root cellar and feed him through winter with plenty left over for neighbors and the food bank in Elkhorn. He worked the garden with satisfaction that came from seeing a year's labor bear fruit. This land that everyone had said was worthless had provided everything he needed. The legal appeals from Sentinel dragged on, but with less vigor. Martin Chase's conviction stood. Other executives were taking plea deals. cooperating with prosecutors, trying to reduce their own sentences. The conspiracy was unraveling completely, 70 years of secrets spilling into public record. More victims were identified. More families got answers. The full scope of what had been protected and hidden was still being calculated. But the pattern was broken. The cycle of violence and cover-ups had ended. No more geologists would die protecting this secret. No more ranchers would face poisoning for refusing to sell. Power had been checked, held accountable, forced to acknowledge limits. That was victory enough. Tom sat on his porch on an October evening, watching clouds move across the sunset, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple and deep blue. Bess was in the corral, the cattle were in the pasture, the garden was harvested and the root cellar was full. Winter was coming, but Tom was ready for it. He thought about the man he had been when he first arrived. Broken, lost, existing but not living. That man seemed like a stranger now, some distant relative Tom barely recognized. He thought about what he had found on this mountain, not just the land or the fight or the conspiracy, but himself, the version of himself he had always been capable of becoming but had never had reason to be. Helen had known. Somehow dying, she had known what he needed. Find something, she had said, and he had found more than he ever imagined. Purpose, community, family, legacy, a reason to wake up every morning that had nothing to do with just passing time until death. The stars began to appear overhead, the same stars his grandfather had watched from this same porch for 50 years. Tom felt the connection across time, the thread that linked him to Nathaniel, to Elizabeth, to Vernon, to everyone who had fought to protect something that mattered more than money. Tomorrow he would wake early and check the cattle. He would mend the fence that needed mending. He would work the land that was his to tend. He would answer calls from people who needed help standing their ground. He would teach his grandchildren what his grandfather had taught him across the decades and the silence. He would live. Not just exist, not just survive, but actually live, with purpose and principle and the quiet satisfaction of knowing he had stood for something when it mattered. The land beneath Thunder Ridge had given him that gift, the chance to become who he was always meant to be. And Tom Garrett, 63 years old, former factory worker, widower, grandfather, rancher, and guardian of a legacy bigger than himself, was grateful for every hard, beautiful, impossible moment of it. The wind moved through the pines, the stars wheeled overhead, the land endured. And Thomas Garrett endured with it, standing his ground, keeping his promise, living the life his wife had asked him to find. Some harvests were not measured in bushels. Some were measured in finding out who you were always meant to be. Tom had found out. And the knowing was enough.